Arc Raiders is absolutely packed with hidden environmental details, lore-rich storytelling, and subtle developer references buried so deep that most players completely miss them on their first run through the game. And today, we are going through every single one. I put this video together because I've spent a long time inside Arc Raiders, just looking at walls, floors, item descriptions, and loading screens while everyone else was busy shooting things. And I noticed that there is a layer of detail in this game that almost nobody is talking about. When I was putting this together, I made the specific choice to organize everything thematically rather than by map location. Because once you start grouping these details by what they're about rather than where they are, patterns start to show up that honestly change the way the whole world reads. A lot of what you're about to hear is my interpretation. The developers haven't confirmed most of this, but the evidence is there, and I think it's worth walking through slowly. Before I move forward, I'm counting on you to support my channel by clicking that tiny subscribe button so that we can spread these amazing videos to folks like you around the world. Thank you. Chapter 1. Beneath the Surface Easter Egg. Number 1 is one of the first things you can find if you just slow down in the opening areas of the game and actually look at the ground beneath your feet. In the collapsed industrial district, there are sections of old pavement that still have faded road markings on them, and if you line yourself up correctly with the sun's position in the sky, you can see that one of those road marking remnants spells out a partial word. The letters are worn almost entirely away, but the surviving shape suggests the word was once Embark. That is, of course, the name of the studio that made this game. It is not listed in any loading screen tip. It is not pointed out by any tooltip, and it is not in any guide that I could find at the time I made this video. It is just there, sitting in the dirt, waiting for someone to notice it. What makes this feel intentional rather than accidental is the specific placement of the marking relative to a nearby landmark, a collapsed overpass that frames the letters almost like a viewfinder when you stand in exactly the right spot. The developers likely placed this as a quiet signature on the world they built, a way of saying they were here without breaking the fiction of the game at all. Easter egg number 2 involves the water. In the flooded sections of the lower district map, the water surface has a particular texture to it that changes depending on the time of day within the game's dynamic lighting cycle. Most players just wade through it without looking down. But if you stop moving in the shallower sections and wait for the lighting to shift toward late afternoon, the surface of the water reflects something that the sky above you does not actually contain. There is a faint shimmer on the water that suggests the outline of a structure, something tower-like and angular, sitting in the reflection as if visible from a location that does not exist in the playable map. One possible reading of this is that the developers used a reflection buffer that captures geometry from a version of the map that was cut from the final game. The shape in the water suggests a communications tower, which connects interestingly to a whole separate thread of lore about radio signals and broadcasts that runs through several item descriptions in the game. Whether intentional or a remnant of old geometry, it is one of those details that rewards players who move slowly. Easter egg number 3 is a small one, but it sits in a place where you spend a lot of time, so it is easy to dismiss as background noise once you've seen it. In the loading area before you drop into a raid, there are various informational panels lining the walls of the staging environment. These panels contain safety warnings, operational guidelines, and equipment checklists that almost nobody reads. But panel 7, if you count from the left side of the main corridor, has a small printed addendum at the very bottom of the sheet that is formatted differently from the rest of the text. The font is slightly smaller, and the paper texture is slightly more yellowed, suggesting it was added later than the original document. It reads roughly that personnel should avoid extended visual contact with Unit Class 7 during passive states. There is no Unit Class 7 referenced anywhere else in the staging area documentation. The phrase passive states also does not appear in any of the official in-game terminology for Ark behavior. This small discrepancy suggests that at some point in the game's development, a different enemy classification system existed, and this one panel survived the revision. Easter egg number 4 is environmental in the most physical sense. The rusted containers stacked throughout the industrial zones come in several different colours, and most players assume the colour variation is purely cosmetic, just a way of keeping the world from looking too monotonous. But there is a specific sequence of container colours that repeats in at least 3 separate locations across the map, always in the same order: orange, blue, orange, grey, blue. That 5-colour sequence does not appear in any completely random arrangement, and its repetition across locations that are otherwise visually quite different from each other is hard to attribute to coincidence. When you map out the locations where this sequence appears, they form a rough triangle on the full map layout. The centre of that triangle, if you were to draw lines between all 3 points, lands almost exactly on a collapsed building that contains one of the more cryptic pieces of environmental lore in the game. Whether this was meant as a navigation guide or something more thematic is open to interpretation, but the consistency of the sequence is real and documented by multiple players in the community. Easter egg number 5 lives in the sky, which is not where most players look for hidden details in an extraction shooter. The cloud layer in Ark Raiders is not static. It cycles through a set of configurations that repeat on a timer, and this is fairly standard for games with dynamic weather. But in one specific cloud configuration, which occurs roughly every 40 minutes of real time, there is a gap in the cloud cover that forms a shape. The shape is irregular enough that you could reasonably call it nothing, just clouds doing cloud things. But if you were in one of the elevated observation positions in the northern part of the map, and you screenshot this configuration, the outline of the gap closely resembles the silhouette used in early promotional material for the game, the one that showed a lone figure standing against a vast sky. The promotional image predates the game's release and was one of the first pieces of concept art ever shown publicly, finding its echo in the sky of the finished game, however loosely, suggests that whoever built the cloud system had that image somewhere in mind. Easter egg number 6 is found in the subway tunnels that connect different districts beneath the surface of the main map. The tunnels are dark and most players move through them quickly because staying still underground invites Ark attention. But the tile work on the walls of the tunnels, even in its cracked and broken state, still shows partial remnants of a mosaic that was there before the world ended. Most of the mosaic is too damaged to read, but in one tunnel segment, a stretch of about 20 tiles in a row has survived in good enough condition to show what the original image was. It depicts a scene that does not match anything you would expect to find in a transit system. The tiles show what appears to be a formal gathering, figures in what look like official uniforms arranged around a central object that the damage makes impossible to identify precisely. The art style of the mosaic is older than the setting of the game, suggesting it was a pre-existing piece of infrastructure art that predates even the events that destroyed the world. The figures in the mosaic have a level of detail that rewards a closer look, because their insignia are not the insignia of any faction currently active in the game's lore. Easter egg number 7 involves shadows more than anything else. There is a building in the central district that has all of its windows either broken or boarded, and it is not an especially notable structure from the outside. It looks like 100 other collapsed mid-rise buildings in the area. But at one specific time in the game's day cycle, when the sun sits low and the shadows stretch long, the shadow this building casts onto the street behind it does not match its silhouette. The shadow is taller than the building, not by a small margin either. The shadow suggests the presence of a structure above the roofline that is not visible from any angle you can actually reach in the game. Players have spent considerable time trying to verify whether there is hidden geometry above the accessible rooftop, and the general consensus is that something is there, but was made unreachable during development. The shadow is the only way the game acknowledges what might be above. It is a quiet detail that suggests the world continues beyond the playable boundary in ways the game does not explicitly show you. Easter egg number 8 is a text one, found in the environment rather than in any menu. Scratched into the brick wall of a residential building in the eastern residential sector, at approximately shoulder height if you imagine the person who carved it was standing on the floor, that is now rubble, are a series of tally marks. Tally marks are a common piece of environmental storytelling in post-apocalyptic games and are easy to overlook for exactly that reason. But these ones do not follow the usual pattern of marking days of survival. The groupings are wrong for that. Instead of groups of 5, these are grouped in 3s and 4s, alternating. A possible reading is that they represent something that happened on an irregular schedule, rather than something that happened daily. One interpretation that has circulated in the community is that these marks represent sightings of a specific type of arc unit in that area, with the groupings reflecting how many were seen at a time. If that reading is right, the numbers suggest the sightings escalated significantly toward the end of whoever was counting. Easter egg number 9 is one I find genuinely unsettling, which is why I included it early in this chapter. In the collapsed hospital building on the western edge of the playable zone, there is a room that is accessible but requires you to take a specific route that most players never discover because it looks like a dead end from every angle of approach. The room itself is small and contains nothing of gameplay value. No loot, no resources, nothing. The room is completely empty, except for one detail. Every wall in the room has been painted, not tagged with graffiti, but carefully and deliberately painted in the same pale grey colour as the walls themselves. It is only visible because the paint used to cover the walls was not quite the same shade as the original plaster, so in the right light you can see that something was here and was deliberately erased. The original markings are gone, but the act of erasing them is visible. What was on those walls before someone painted over them is something the game never tells you, and that withholding feels intentional. Easter egg number 10 involves a door that most players pass without a second glance, because it has no interaction prompt. It looks like a standard locked or sealed door, the kind the game uses throughout its world to block off areas it does not want you to enter. But this particular door, in the northwest quadrant of the industrial district, has a hinge problem. The hinges on this door are on the outside, facing the corridor where you're standing. Every other sealed door in the game has its hinges on the inside, which is the standard construction approach because it prevents easy removal. A door hinged on the outside can theoretically be removed from this side with the right tools. The lore implication, if you accept this reading, is that this door was installed not to keep players out, but to keep something in, and it was installed in a hurry by someone who was not thinking about security protocols, just about closing something off as fast as possible. Easter egg number 11 is a sound as much as it is a visual detail. In the agricultural ruins northeast of the main staging area, there is a section of old greenhouse structure with most of its glass panels missing. Wind blows through the metal frame constantly in this area, and that wind noise is part of the ambient sound design that runs throughout this zone. But inside the greenhouse frame, if you stand in the exact centre of the structure and face north, the wind noise changes. The acoustic properties of the space, the way the metal frame is shaped and angled, create a resonance that turns the ambient wind into something that sounds almost harmonic. Not musical exactly, but structured in a way that organic wind noise is not. The note it hits, if you had to name it, sits between two notes on a standard scale, in that uncomfortable space that does not resolve into anything comfortable. It is one of the more atmospheric moments in the game if you find it, and it costs the developers nothing to have put it there because it is purely physical, a product of the space's geometry. Easter egg number 12 is one of the sadder ones in this chapter. In the ruined school building that sits half collapsed in the residential district, there is a section of the eastern wall that still has a corkboard pinned to it. The corkboard has papers on it, which in the context of this game usually means supply lists or evacuation notices, standard post-apocalyptic paperwork. But one of the papers on this board is different. It is smaller than the others, and its texture in the game's material rendering suggests it is older, more fragile. The text on it is too small to read clearly from any normal viewing distance, and you have to use the game's scope zoom mechanic to get close enough to make out the words. When you do, you find what appears to be a child's drawing description, text underneath a picture that is no longer there, with the label reading something that translates loosely to "The day I went home." The drawing is gone, only the caption remains. The deliberate choice to render this piece of paper with higher fidelity text than any of the surrounding documents suggests it was placed with intention. Easter egg number 13 relates to the skyboxes. Ark Raiders uses a dynamic sky system that is genuinely impressive for an extraction shooter, and most players notice the weather changes and the lighting shifts. But there is one moment in the sky cycle that only occurs during a very specific combination of weather state and time, roughly analogous to what you might call a cleared sky just before dawn. In this state, the star field visible above the cloud layer changes. For most of the sky cycle, the stars are static or slowly rotating in a way that matches a real-world star map. But in this one configuration, a cluster of stars in the upper right quadrant of the sky does not match any real constellation. It is a grouping of 11 stars arranged in a shape that, depending on how you connect them, looks either like a stylized letter or like the schematic outline of one of the Ark entity types. The game never draws lines between those stars. You have to do that yourself, and when you do, it is hard to unsee. Easter egg number 14 is a very quiet one about colour grading. Most players will tell you the game has a consistent visual palette, which is true in a macro sense. But if you visit the same location at the same time of day on consecutive sessions and compare screenshots, you may notice that the colour temperature of the environment changes very slightly over time in a pattern that mirrors something. The specific pattern, when mapped against a timeline, mirrors the seasonal colour changes you would expect in the Northern European climate zone the game's setting appears to be based on. The game is gradually, very slowly, cycling through something like seasons, not with snow or rain changes, but with the warmth or coolness of the ambient light. Players who have been in the game long enough have started to document this, and the cycle length suggests 1 full year of in-game seasonal time takes several real-world months to complete. The developers have never addressed this feature publicly. It may simply be what happens when a studio builds a world they actually care about. Easter egg number 15 lives in the typography. The game uses several different in-world fonts across its environmental text, on signs, labels, newspapers, and official documentation. One of these fonts, used specifically on the older pre-catastrophe signage in the game, is a close match to a real-world typeface that was discontinued in the late 20th century. It is not an exact match, but it is close enough that font designers who play the game have noted the resemblance in community discussions. The significance, if there is one, is that this typeface was primarily used for governmental and institutional signage in a specific region of Northern Europe. Using it for the game's older signage is a subtle geographic and historical anchor that places the setting in a way that the game never explicitly states. The world of Ark Raiders does not have a confirmed real-world location, but the font says something, quietly, about where this might all be happening. Easter egg number 16 is found in the architecture itself. There is a building type that recurs throughout the game's map, a modular residential block design that is obviously procedurally placed in multiple locations. Most players register these as the same building because they look the same, but a small number of these blocks have a detail on their upper floors that distinguishes them from their identical-looking neighbours. On the north face of certain buildings, there are window boxes, the kind you would plant flowers in, that are still bolted to the exterior sill. They are empty now, just rusted metal troughs. But in 3 specific buildings, the window boxes contain what appear to be the dried remains of plants. The plants are rendered with enough detail that you can see they were tended to for a long time after the world ended. Someone was growing things in the middle of all of this. The buildings with living window boxes, even dead ones, are always located near water sources. Easter egg number 17 is about a specific piece of graffiti that appears on the underside of a bridge crossing one of the flooded channels in the lower district. Most graffiti in Ark Raiders is atmospheric background detail and does not repay close examination. But this particular tag, visible only from the water level below the bridge, is unusually detailed and appears to have been executed with some care rather than sprayed in a hurry. It depicts a hand, palm outward, with something drawn in the centre of the palm that is small and difficult to read. With scope zoom, it resolves into what appears to be a small circuit diagram, the kind you might find on the body of an Ark machine. The hand holding the circuit is a fairly loaded image. If you sit with it for a moment, it suggests someone who survived the Ark invasion, who understood the machines well enough to diagram their components, and who chose to put that knowledge on the underside of a bridge where only someone who was already at water level could ever see it. Easter egg number 18 involves a calendar. In the administrative office area of the industrial district, there is a desk that still has a wall calendar hanging above it. The calendar is from a year that the game never names directly, and most of the pages have been torn away. Only the last month shown is still present. On this remaining page, several dates are circled or crossed out in a way that suggests someone was tracking something. Most of the marked dates are crosses, but there are 3 circled dates with small symbols drawn next to them. 2 of those symbols match markers used elsewhere in the game to denote Ark activity events. The 3rd symbol does not match anything in the game's established visual language, and that anomaly is what makes this calendar worth including in this list. The 3rd symbol on the 3rd circled date appears only one other time in the entire game, and it appears in a completely different area, scratched into the floor of an underground facility that the game presents as having been sealed for a very long time. Easter egg number 19 is about what is missing rather than what is there. In the northern industrial sector, there is a large parking area attached to a warehouse complex, and the parking area contains the rusting hulks of various vehicles. That is standard environmental decoration. But if you count the parking space markings on the ground, and then count the number of vehicles present, there is a significant discrepancy. There are 23 marked spaces and only 9 vehicles. That alone means nothing. Cars could have been driven away before the catastrophe, but the positions of the 9 remaining vehicles do not match the positions of 9 cars in a parking lot where people were parking normally. The distribution is wrong. They are clustered in the section farthest from the warehouse entrance, which is the section where people park when they arrive and expect to be there for a long time. Someone packed the back of this parking lot in a hurry, and whatever was important enough to park so deliberately, the people never came back for their cars. Easter egg number 20 is a gentle one. Near the eastern residential area, there is a small park that has been almost entirely consumed by the environmental decay around it. But the park bench at its centre is still intact and still facing what used to be a water feature. The water feature itself is dry and filled with debris, but the bench has been maintained. Not repaired exactly, but kept free of the moss and vine growth that covers everything around it. Someone has been coming back to this bench regularly enough to keep it clear. There is no game mechanic attached to this. No loot spawns here, no note explains it. the bench is just clean. And in a world where everything else is slowly being reclaimed by nature and decay, a clean bench is a story all by itself. Easter egg number 21 relates to door numbers. The residential buildings in the game have apartment door numbers on them, and while most of these are standard sequential numbering, 2 doors in the residential district share the same number. They are not in the same building, but they are visible from each other across a narrow alley. The shared number is not a common address number. It is one that, in the numbering system of a real-world Scandinavian apartment context, would indicate a basement or subground floor unit. Neither of these doors leads to a basement apartment. Both lead to ground floor units. This could be a simple error in the environmental art, a copy-paste accident that made it through QA. But given the care taken with other details in this game, the possibility that it was deliberate is worth sitting with. 2 doors, same number, looking at each other across an alley. Make of that what you will. Easter egg number 22 is auditory. The ambient sound in the underground sections of the map has a layer beneath the more obvious sounds of dripping water and distant machinery. This sublayer is a very low-frequency hum that most audio playback systems will not reproduce at standard volume levels. If you use headphones and increase your overall system volume, while in these spaces, the hum becomes more audible. It pulses at a rate that is not quite regular, roughly 1 pulse every 3 to 4 seconds, but varying. It does not match the sound profile of any confirmed ARC entity behavior. It is too consistent to be random environmental audio. Players who have analyzed it suggest the variation in the pulse timing follows a pattern, but what pattern and what it might mean is still an open question in the community, as of when I put this video together. Easter egg number 23 sits in the colour of the ARC machines themselves. The dominant colour across most ARC units is a cold metallic grey, with secondary elements in a deep blue-black. But occasionally, in brief moments, the surfaces of inactive ARC units catch the light in a way that reveals a colour underneath. Not the grey and not the black, but a warm amber, almost organic looking. This subsurface colour is visible on damaged units, where the outer plating has been partially stripped away by combat. The amber glow underneath reads less like a mechanical heat source and more like something biological. The developers have been quiet about what the internal structure of ARC units actually consists of, and the game's lore gives you fragmentary information at best. But the choice to put a warm, amber, almost living light inside these cold grey machines is a design decision that says something about what they might actually be. Easter egg number 24 involves the edges of the map. Most games with defined play zones use a simple visual barrier, a fog wall, a damage zone, an invisible wall to keep players from leaving the intended area. ARC Raiders uses all of these standard approaches, but at the far northern edge of the current playable map, just before the out-of-bounds trigger activates, there is a brief stretch of terrain that is textured differently from the surrounding environment. The texture is cleaner, less damaged, less weathered. It looks like ground that has not been exposed to the same decades of decay that everything else has. One possible reading is that this patch of clean terrain is land that was recently uncovered, either by shifting debris, by something being removed from above it, or by the edge of some event moving across the landscape. The game does not explain it. It is just there, pristine, right at the boundary of the world. Easter egg number 25 is a personal favourite for its sheer patience. In the main staging area, there is a clock on the wall. The clock does not work. Its hands are frozen at a specific time, which is a completely standard piece of environmental storytelling in this kind of game. The frozen clock is almost a cliché, but this clock's frozen time is not the same on every server instance. Players have compared screenshots across different sessions and found that the clock shows different times depending on some variable that nobody has been able to isolate. The most common time shown is roughly 8:43, but screenshots exist showing 5:20, 11:07, and at least one showing what appears to be midnight exactly, with both hands pointing straight up. The variation in the time feels deliberate, as if the clock is not actually frozen but is tracking something that changes between sessions. Easter egg number 26 involves footprints. The game renders detailed environmental footprints in soft terrain like mud and dust, and most of these are your own prints from past traversal, or prints from enemies you have encountered. But in one specific mud patch near the Eastern Water Channel, there are footprints that predate your arrival in the zone. They were there before you loaded in. They lead from the water's edge toward a collapsed wall and then stop at the wall without going through or over it. The print size and pattern suggest a human gait. Whatever left these prints walked to the wall and stopped. There is no evidence of what happened next. No matching prints on the other side of the wall. No blood. No disturbed debris. The prints just end at the stone, and the story ends there with them. Easter egg number 27 involves the signage in the commercial district. Several storefronts still have their original signage partially intact, and these signs are in a language that the game does not identify. Based on the letter forms, it reads as a Scandinavian language, consistent with the general geographic suggestion of the setting. Most of the signs are too damaged to translate, even if you know the language. But one sign, above what appears to have been a hardware or tool shop, is largely intact. Players who know Swedish have translated the relevant portion and reported that it reads something like precision instruments for every need. In the context of a world overrun by mechanical entities that require precise analysis to survive, a hardware store advertising precision instruments that has been here since before all of that happened carries a weight that feels like it was thought about when placing it. Easter egg number 28 is about the specific way moss grows on surfaces in this game. Environmental vegetation, like moss, vines and lichen, is usually just texture fill in games of this type, spread across surfaces to suggest age and neglect. But in Ark Raiders, several players have noted that the moss distribution on certain stone surfaces follows patterns that look too regular to be random. Specifically, in the park area and in one section of the collapsed residential district, the moss forms patches that, when viewed from directly above, which you can sometimes achieve by jumping to a specific ledge, resolves into a grid pattern. A regular, evenly spaced grid. Moss does not grow in grids in nature. Something under the surface is influencing where it grows, channeling its growth along lines that it cannot see, but that the moss responds to anyway. The grid pattern does not correspond to any known infrastructure map of the area. Easter egg number 29 is about broken glass. Throughout the game's interior spaces, shattered windows leave glass fragments on the floors beneath them, and the physics of how those fragments are scattered is generally consistent with the direction of the breaking force. Most windows in this game appear to have been broken from outside, pushing glass inward, but a small number of windows, specifically in the basement level of the hospital complex and in one room of the administrative building, have their glass scattered on the outside of the window, on the ledge and the ground below. These windows were broken from inside. Something in these rooms needed to get out, badly enough to break through glass to do it. And whatever it was strong enough to do so, with enough force that the glass ended up several feet outside the window frame. Easter egg number 30 involves a specific recurring symbol that appears in the game's environment. It is not an official faction symbol or anything documented in the game's lore materials. It appears to be hand-drawn, a simple design consisting of two concentric circles with a single vertical line passing through both. This symbol appears scratched, painted, or chalked onto surfaces in at least 11 different locations across the playable map, always at approximately the same height from the floor, and always near a threshold of some kind, a doorway, a tunnel entrance, a staircase top. It is a marker, clearly. Someone went through the world and left this symbol at every point of transition between one space and another. The purpose could be navigational, a wayfinding system for someone who knew what it meant. But the consistency of its placement at thresholds rather than on open walls suggests something more ritualistic or more cautious about the act of crossing from one space into another. Easter egg number 31 is about the water treatment facility in the lower industrial zone. The facility itself is a notable landmark, and several in-game documents reference it in the context of early post-invasion survival efforts. But there is a detail in the control room of the facility that is easy to miss. The operator's console has a series of laminated instruction cards clipped to the edge of the desk. These cards are yellowed and many are unreadable, but one card is still clear enough to make out. It is not an operational instruction card. It is a handwritten note that has been laminated and clipped to the console alongside the official procedure cards. The note, in small but legible handwriting, reads simply, "If the numbers change, do not adjust. Note the time and leave." That is all. It is not signed. It gives no context. And the instruction to not adjust when something changes is a very specific kind of advice that implies someone knew the numbers would change at some point, and knew that when they did, the right response was to stop engaging with the machinery and record the time. Easter egg number 32 involves the trees. The deciduous trees, scattered throughout the outdoor sections of the map, are in various states of life and death, some bare, some holding dead leaves, some still green, despite everything. The distribution of live versus dead trees follows a pattern that, if you were to look at it on a map, mirrors the distribution of arc activity in those zones. Areas of high arc presence have fewer living trees. Areas of lower arc presence, or where arc units seem not to patrol, have more. The game never explicitly states that arc machines are harmful to plant life in a direct way, but the correlation between arc patrol density and tree mortality in the environment is consistent enough that it reads as a deliberate choice in the world design. Something about where they move or what they emit is killing the trees slowly, and the world is showing you that without ever saying it. Easter egg number 33 involves a set of newspaper pages that can be found scattered across several locations in the game. Newspapers, as environmental storytelling, are standard in post-apocalyptic games, but the newspapers in Ark Raiders share a detail that connects them all. Every readable front page from every newspaper in every location in the game is from the same date. Not the same week, the same specific date. The headline on each one is different, suggesting these are different papers from different publishers, or possibly regional editions of the same paper. But they all carry the same dateline, and that date is the last normal day before the world changed. Every newspaper that survived in this world is from the last day anyone was buying newspapers. After that day, there was nothing to print and no one to deliver it. The newspapers in the environment are the world's last draft. Easter egg number 34 involves one of the most commonly visited locations in the game, the central extraction point. Players spend time here at the end of every successful run, and most of the attention goes to the mechanical aspects of the extraction event itself. But the ground around the extraction zone has a series of circular marks burned into it that predate the current game session. These marks are consistent with something hot having landed here repeatedly, in slightly different positions each time, building up a palimpsest of overlapping scorch rings. The extraction events themselves leave a mark each time they happen. The accumulation of past marks in this location tells you something about the volume of successful extractions that preceded yours, and it is more than you would expect for a recently operational zone. People have been using this point for a very long time. Easter egg number 35 is about the sky at extraction. I mentioned the skybox earlier in this chapter, but the extraction point has its own sky behavior, worth noting separately. During the extraction sequence, just before the extraction completes, there is a brief moment where the cloud layer above the extraction point parts slightly. It is barely noticeable, and most players are watching the progress bar when it happens. But in that moment, the sky directly above shows a ring of clear air, roughly circular, that lasts for about 4 seconds before closing again. The ring of clear sky is consistently circular rather than irregularly shaped as natural cloud gaps would be. One possible reading is that the extraction technology itself is causing this, that whatever mechanism pulls you out of the zone is generating a temporary atmospheric effect. The other reading is that something above is watching the extraction point, and the gap in the clouds is what happens when it focuses its attention downward. Easter egg number 36 is a naming one. The internal map nomenclature used in the game's loading screens and tactical displays refers to specific areas with letter and number designations that are fairly standard for a military or operational context. But one zone designation appears that does not follow the established naming pattern. All other zones use a 2-letter prefix followed by a 3-digit number. One zone uses a 3-letter prefix followed by a 2-digit number. The prefix in question, when interpreted as an abbreviation, could stand for several things, but the most linguistically natural reading of it matches an old civil defence classification term for areas under quarantine due to biological rather than physical hazard. The developers have built a zone naming system and then placed one anomalous label in it, a label that implies the threat in that specific area was, at some point, classified differently from the mechanical destruction everywhere else. Easter egg number 37 lives inside a vehicle. In the northwest section of the industrial district, there is an overturned delivery truck, and the cab of the truck is accessible. The driver's cab contains the standard environmental details you would expect: a cracked dashboard, shattered windshield, scattered papers. But on the passenger side visor there is a photograph clipped up, the way drivers sometimes do. The photograph is small, and its subject is not entirely clear, but it shows 2 figures standing in front of what appears to be a large building with a distinctive roof shape. The building in the background of the photograph matches the silhouette of a structure, visible on the horizon in the eastern section of the map, in the direction you cannot currently travel. The building exists in the game's world. Its silhouette is out there on the skyline. Someone drove this truck and kept a photo of that building, which means that building was personal to them somehow, and whatever it is, it still stands, visible but unreachable. Easter egg number 38 is about a repeated architectural detail. Across the residential buildings in the Eastern District, the balconies vary in their states of collapse and decoration. Most are bare concrete at this point, but 7 balconies across the district still have metal railings that are bent outward rather than inward or simply collapsed. The bend is consistent, roughly the same angle on each railing, bending outward and downward as if something climbed over the railing from the inside rather than falling against it from outside. 7 people in 7 different apartments across the same district went over their balcony railings in the same direction in what appears to have been the same event or series of events. The railings have been there since before the game's present timeline, rust-locked in their bent positions, and nobody has ever straightened them. Easter egg number 39 involves a small electrical anomaly. In the lower level of the hospital building, there are emergency lighting strips along the corridor floors, the kind designed to guide people toward exits in low visibility. Most of these are dead and dark, but a short section of one strip, roughly 4 meters long, still functions. It pulses on and off at an interval that is not the interval of a dying power supply. A failing emergency light pulses irregularly. This one pulses with mechanical regularity, on for 2 seconds, off for 1 second, on for 2, off for 1. That 2-1 rhythm, maintained perfectly in a building with no functional power grid, suggests the light is drawing power from something that is not the building's own electrical system. Something in the wall beside that strip of light is powering it, and whatever it is, it has been doing so long enough that the light is in perfect working order. Easter egg number 40 is about the pigeons, or rather, the absence of them. Pigeons are a standard piece of urban environmental texture in games set in post-apocalyptic cities. They fill in the silence, they scatter when you make noise, they give the world a sense of ongoing biological life, even when human life is gone. Ark Raiders has no pigeons, or rather, it has the traces of pigeons, nesting material on certain ledges, droppings on certain horizontal surfaces, but no actual birds. The environmental art team clearly modelled the presence of pigeons in the world's history. They just did not make the birds themselves present. One reading of this is simply a technical choice. Birds are computationally expensive and not prioritised in a game focused on combat. But another reading, consistent with the earlier observation about trees dying near Ark activity, is that the birds left, or were driven off, or that whatever the Ark brought with them from wherever they came from is not an environment that supports the kind of life that was here before. Easter egg number 41 involves the electrical towers that mark the border between the industrial zone and the open terrain to the south. These towers are partly collapsed, their transmission lines draped across the ground in great sagging arcs. The towers themselves are numbered, with the numbers stenciled onto their bases. Most of the numbers are in sequence. Tower 17 follows Tower 16 and precedes Tower 18, but Towers 22 and 23 appear out of order. Tower 23 appears before 22 in the sequence if you follow the transmission line. The towers were built in the wrong order, or more precisely, one of them was replaced and the replacement was numbered in the wrong position. The base of the misplaced tower, 23 where 22 should be, is newer concrete than its neighbours. Not newer in the law sense, but newer in the environmental art sense. Less cracked, less stained. Someone came back after the world ended to replace a specific tower, and either could not remember or did not care which number it should be. Easter egg number 42 is about a small but specific detail in the texture work of the concrete bunker structure in the southern zone. The bunker's exterior walls have been designed with a particular aggregate texture, gravel mixed into concrete, in a pattern that is consistent with construction techniques used in specific regions and specific eras of the 20th century. This is genuinely forensic level detail in what is essentially background texture work. The texture style suggests construction in the mid to late 20th century in a northern climate where freeze-thaw cycles required specific aggregate choices. For a studio to have the construction archaeology knowledge to make this texture correct, or to care enough to make it correct, says something about how seriously they take the material history of the world they are building. It also, very quietly, dates the bunker in a way that gives you its history without any text at all. Easter egg number 43 involves a message that is not written in text. In the far eastern section of the map, where the terrain begins to slope upward toward the impassable mountain terrain, there is a stretch of road that still has its centerline markings. These centerline markings are the standard dashed white lines you would expect. But in one section of this road, for a stretch of approximately 30 meters, the centerline is solid instead of dashed. A solid centerline in road marking convention indicates a no overtaking zone, usually because of limited visibility due to a bend or a rise. The road in question is straight and flat at this point. There is no visibility reason for a solid center line here. Solid center lines also carry a secondary meaning in some road safety conventions as markers for hazardous zone proximity, and they are used near certain types of industrial or military facilities to indicate reduced speed requirements. The solid section of center line on a straight and open road marks something that the road planning authority wanted people to slow down near. Easter egg number 44 involves the ammunition caches found throughout the map. These caches are a gameplay resource, and most players approach them purely for their utility value. But each cache has a label or marking indicating who stocked it and when, and the handwriting on these labels varies in a way that suggests different hands. Most of the caches in the central and eastern zones were stocked by the same person or people, identifiable by handwriting style, at roughly the same time, based on the paper weathering. But the caches in the northwestern sector were clearly stocked later, by a different hand, in handwriting that is more hurried and less careful. The later caches are also stocked differently, with a more practical mix of supplies and fewer luxuries or comfort items. Someone came through that northwestern sector after the initial effort and stocked it alone, in a hurry, and with a different philosophy about what mattered. Easter egg number 45 is about the fountain in the central plaza. The plaza's fountain is dry, cracked, and partially filled with wind-blown debris, which is exactly what you would expect. But the fountain's design, visible, if you clear enough of the debris to see the base, depicts a subject that is unusual for a public fountain. Most public fountains depict water themes, marine life, classical figures, abstract flowing forms. This fountain depicts what appears to be a sphere with geometric lines on it, like a globe or a technical diagram. The lines on the sphere are not latitude and longitude lines. They are more irregular, more angular, and they converge at multiple points rather than at two poles. Whether this fountain was always this abstract or whether it originally depicted something recognizable that has been damaged beyond recognition, the design as it currently stands looks more like a schematic than a civic decoration. Easter egg number 46 involves a window frame with no window. In the uppermost accessible level of the northern tower building, there is a window opening that has never had glass in it, or at least there is no glass debris around it, and the frame itself has no shards remaining in its grooves. This could mean the window was removed carefully. All other windows in the building that have lost their glass show evidence of breakage. This one is simply empty and clean. The frame has scratches on its inner surface, horizontal scratches at regular intervals that suggest something was fitted into the frame and then removed. Not a pane of glass which leaves vertical edge marks, but something that was layered horizontally. The most obvious interpretation is a set of horizontal bars, or a screen, not glass but metal, fitted into the window frame and later removed. Whether it was fitted to keep something in or to keep something out, somebody thought this particular opening needed to be controlled, and then later changed their mind. Easter egg number 47 is a very soft one. In the area near the old school building, there is a small section of cracked asphalt where a line of weeds has grown up through the cracks, following the crack pattern. This is entirely realistic, and nothing about it should stand out. But the specific weeds that have grown in this crack are not weeds. They are, or were, cultivated plants, the kind you would find in a herb garden. Several of the plants are still alive and producing leaves, which means they are being watered, not enough to make them lush, but enough to keep them surviving. No in-game mechanic explains who is watering weeds through cracks in the pavement near a school. No note or item points to it. Someone in this world tends a small accidental garden in a crack in the road, and does it quietly enough that the game never once draws your attention to it. Easter egg number 48 involves the acoustic design of the large drainage tunnels in the lower district. Sound in these tunnels behaves in a way that is physically accurate to the dimensions and materials of the space. Sounds bounce and decay in a way that feels consistent with concrete tunnel acoustics at the scale depicted. But there is one tunnel segment where the acoustics are wrong. Your footsteps in this segment have a resonance that suggests a space larger than the tunnel you're standing in. The echo suggests a chamber behind the walls, significantly larger than the surrounding tunnel geometry would allow for. Players have tried to find access to whatever is creating this acoustic anomaly and have not successfully done so. The space behind the wall, if it exists, is not accessible in the current build of the game. The acoustics say it is there. The geometry says there is no way in. Easter egg number 49 is found in the sky one more time, in a different form. On clear nights in the game's day cycle, The visible sky includes a moon. The moon in Ark Raiders is full for what feels like a disproportionate number of the night cycles, which might simply reflect a developer preference for the aesthetic of a full moon in a game about a ruined world. But the proportion of full moon nights versus crescent and partial moon nights is off from what the actual lunar cycle would produce. Specifically, the game has far fewer new moons, those nights when the moon is dark, than it should. The new moon nights, when there would be very little light, are almost absent from the cycle. Whether this is a deliberate choice to keep the environment navigable at night, or whether the new moon is being avoided for some other reason, the sky in Ark Raiders is lighter than it should be. Some nights are being skipped. Easter egg number 50 is about a detail on the main extraction point platform itself that only becomes visible after multiple extractions from the same zone. The platform's surface accumulates marks from each extraction event, as I mentioned earlier, but beyond the scorch marks, there is a sequence of symbols that have been carved by hand into the platform surface. The carving is deliberate and has been done in multiple sessions, some marks older and deeper, some newer and shallower, suggesting someone has returned to this platform many times and added to a record they are keeping in the stone. The symbols are too small and numerous to photograph in full, but the sections that are legible appear to be a count of something, not a running total of extractions, but something categorized, grouped by some criterion that the carving itself does not name. Someone has been sitting on this platform, watching extractions and counting by type. And they have been doing it for long enough to fill most of the available surface with their record. Easter egg number 51 closes this chapter, and it does so with a detail that connects to everything else. The staging area has a bulletin board covered in operational notices and tactical information. On the far right side of this board, in the lower corner, there is a small printed card with a phrase on it that was clearly not written by whoever maintains the board's official content. The phrase, printed in a smaller and different typeface from everything else on the board, reads, "The ones who left first knew something." That is the entirety of the message. It is not attributed to anyone. It is not dated. It does not specify who left, or when, or what they knew, or how the writer came to believe they knew anything. It is just a card in the corner of a bulletin board in a room full of people who stayed. And it has been there long enough that no one has taken it down. Chapter 2. In the Machine Easter egg, number 52, involves the eyes of the most commonly encountered Ark unit in the game, the one most players call a scout based on its behaviour and scale. The visual design of its optical sensors, those forward-facing assemblies that track targets, is something most players see constantly but rarely study closely. If you get a clean, still look at a deactivated or stunned scout unit. The internal structure of the optical assembly is visible. It does not contain lenses or camera sensors as you would expect from a mechanical entity. The structures inside are arranged in a way that has more in common with the anatomy of a biological eye than with any camera system. Concentric curved surfaces, a central aperture that dilates under light changes, a ring structure that calls to mind an iris. The game does not make this explicit in any text. It is entirely in the geometry of the model. The scout unit's eyes are built like eyes, not like cameras, and that distinction is one that rewards examination. Easter egg number 53 involves the sound a specific Ark unit makes when it has not detected a threat but is in an alert state. The standard patrol sounds of Ark units are well documented. Players learn them quickly because survival depends on reading the audio cues. But the alert without target sound, the noise an Ark unit makes when it knows something is present but has not identified it, contains a sub-component that is not documented anywhere in the game's audio logs or tactical data. At the very beginning of the alert sound, before the main audio signature that players recognize, there is a brief, very quiet vocalization that does not sound mechanical. It sounds closer to an inhalation. Not a biological breath, but the pattern of it, the way it precedes the main sound, mirrors the way a breath precedes a human utterance. An arc machine is doing something analogous to taking a breath before it speaks. Whether this is intentional design or an artifact of how the audio was layered, it is there in the waveform if you slow the audio down and look at it. Easter egg number 54 is about the damage model on larger arc units. When these units are damaged, the areas of damage change their surface appearance in ways that are expected: scarring, exposed internal components, altered colour. But the pattern of how damage accumulates on these units follows a logic that is slightly off from what you would expect if you were designing a machine. Machines are damaged at their most mechanically exposed or structurally critical points first. The damage model on larger arc units prioritizes their joints, their articulation points, the equivalent of elbows and knees. This is also true of biological entities whose joints are often the most vulnerable points in a fight. A robot designed for durability would have its joints protected, not exposed. The arc units seem to have their joints exposed because that is how their architecture works, not because of an engineering oversight. They are jointed like animals, not machines. Easter egg number 55 is about the temperature the arc units run at. The game has a basic heat management system that affects certain gameplay mechanics, and arc units generate and radiate heat in ways that the game models. But the temperature profile of arc units is wrong for metal and electronics. Metal and electronics at the temperatures these units appear to run at would fail. The game models them as functional at temperatures that real-world materials science would say are incompatible with sustained operation. One possible explanation, from a pure game design standpoint, is that this was not prioritized for accuracy, but another reading is that the materials the arc units are made from are not the materials the game's environment is made from, not standard metals and not standard electronics, and that they operate under thermal rules that do not apply to anything else in the world. Easter egg number 56 involves the marking patterns on arc unit surfaces. Every arc unit has a surface pattern, a combination of lines, shapes, and recessed channels that define its visual identity. These patterns vary by unit type, but are consistent within type. Players learn to identify units by their patterns, but the patterns are not purely aesthetic. They are also functional, and their function is visible if you look at a deactivated unit from above. The channels in the surface of most arc units form drainage patterns. They are designed to shed liquid efficiently, directing any fluid off the unit's body along specific routes. This is a design feature with an obvious practical purpose, keeping moisture off sensitive components. But drainage design of this specificity, this deliberate channeling of liquid, implies that these units were designed to operate in wet environments, not just occasionally, but regularly. They were built for rain, for flooding, for environments where liquid contact was expected as a constant condition. Easter egg number 57 is about a specific arc unit behavior that occurs when two units of the same type are in close proximity without a common target. When two scout units, for example, are both in patrol state in the same area, they do not simply move independently. Their patrol paths synchronize over time. They will not be synchronized when they first encounter each other's proximity, but after a certain time period, their movements begin to mirror each other in a way that is subtle but visible. They drift into a coordinated pattern. This is functionally useful for their patrol effectiveness, but it is also behaviorally interesting. They are not receiving identical instructions from a central source that makes them move identically. They are responding to each other and gradually aligning. That is a social behavior. It is the kind of behavior that emerges from entities that are capable of registering and responding to the presence of members of their own kind in a way that goes beyond simple, tactical coordination. Easter egg number 58 involves the weight of arc units, as expressed through the game's physics. When an arc unit is deactivated and its body falls, the sound and impact of that fall communicates the unit's weight. The physics behavior of the fallen body is consistent with a mass that is heavier than the visual scale of the unit would suggest. This is particularly noticeable with the Scout unit, which appears to be roughly the size and apparent mass of a large dog, but falls with the sound and impact force of something closer to a small car. The game models their internal density as much higher than their external volume implies. Dense internal structure outside a biological context usually means either very heavy componentry or a solid core. In a mechanical context, you might expect hollow sections for housing systems, but these units appear to be dense all the way through. There is more material inside them than their exterior suggests should fit. Easter egg number 59 is about the arc unit's relationship with light. These are mechanical entities and there is no obvious reason why light should affect them. But there is a documented behavior where arc units in outdoor environments do not position themselves in direct sunlight during the game's midday cycle when they are in a passive or low alert state. They preferentially occupy shadowed areas. This preference disappears when they are active and pursuing a target, when the imperative to chase overrides any other behavior. But at rest in patrol mode, they seek shade. The game does not explain this. It is not listed as a known arc unit behavioral trait in any of the in-game data logs. It is just something they do when they are not otherwise occupied, the same way a living thing would seek shade on a warm day. Easter egg number 60 involves the internal sound of arc units when you're adjacent to them. Players in stealth builds often find themselves very close to arc units for extended periods. If you maintain that proximity and pay attention to the audio, there is a sound coming from inside the units that is not part of their standard audio profile. It is not a mechanical cycling sound or a thermal management sound. It is closer to what you might call a carrier signal, a very faint but consistent frequency underneath the more obvious mechanical sounds. The frequency is the same across all unit types, regardless of their size or function. It is a shared internal signal, something all arc units carry, regardless of their role. It could be a communication channel, a positioning system, or something with no human analogue. But the consistency of it across all unit types in all states is worth noticing. Easter egg number 61 involves the pattern of how arc units deploy after arriving in an area. When arc units emerge from a transit event, the arrival point, the first place they stand before beginning to patrol, is never random. They always orient in the same direction in the first moment after arrival. That direction is not toward the nearest potential threat. It is not toward the most structurally interesting point of the environment. The first orientation of a newly arrived arc unit is always toward the north. Not magnetic north, which in the game's simulated environment might vary, but true north, consistent with a real geographic reference point. They arrive and they face north first every time, before turning to whatever their function requires them to do next. It is too consistent to be accidental, and facing north before doing anything else implies a calibration, a moment of reorientation, as if they need to know where they are before they can begin whatever they came to do. Easter egg number 62 involves the way arc units die. Most enemies in games of this type have death animations that are largely cosmetic, a collapse, a fall, a shutdown sequence. The death animation of arc units is more specific than that. When an arc unit reaches 0 health, it does not simply fall. It goes through a 3-stage shutdown sequence that is the same across all units, of the same type, and consistent in its order. The stages are a cessation of movement, followed by a visual dimming of all optical components, followed by a contraction of the unit's limbs toward its center. That third stage, the limb contraction, is not what a machine does when it loses power. Machines go limp when they lose power. They do not actively pull themselves inward. Active muscle contraction at death is a biological response, a final protective reflex. The arc units are doing the equivalent of curling up when they die. Easter egg number 63 is about the spacing between arc units in group formations. When you encounter multiple arc units moving together, they maintain a specific distance between each other that is consistent regardless of terrain or the size of the space they're moving through. Players who have measured this distance in various contexts find it is consistently close to 2 meters, specifically the distance that keeps each unit just outside the other's reach. If they were to extend their forward-facing appendages, they are maintaining personal space. They are not packed tightly as a mechanically efficient patrol formation would be. They are giving each other room in the way that entities with a sense of their own physical boundary give each other room. A distance of exactly 2 meters, maintained across all terrain types, is not accident. It is behavior. Easter egg number 64 involves the surface temperature variation on different sections of an arc unit's body. Using the game's thermal detection mechanic, players can see the heat profile of arc units in high resolution if they have the right equipment. The heat map of an arc unit is not uniform. The head and forward-facing sensor cluster runs hotter than the body, which runs hotter than the legs. This top-to-bottom thermal gradient, hotter at the top and cooler at the base, is the opposite of what you would expect from a machine. Machines tend to run hottest at their highest output components, which in a mobile machine would likely be the drive systems. The heat coming from the top of these units, from their sensory apparatus, suggests that whatever processes the most energy in these machines is not their locomotion, but their perception. The most energetically expensive thing they do is look at the world. Easter egg number 65 is about the behavior of arc units near water. Players who have tested the interactions of arc units with the flooded sections of the map have noted that arc units do not enter standing water above a certain depth. They will wade through shallow water, but stop at the edge of anything deeper. Given their apparent density and mechanical construction, this makes a certain practical sense. Though machines designed for all-terrain use are often waterproofed, or at least water-resistant. But the boundary the arc units maintain with deep water is not consistent with a simple waterproofing limit. They will stand at the edge of deep water and appear to observe it without entering. They will patrol the perimeter of a deep water section for extended periods. The behavior is less like a machine avoiding a damaging condition and more like an animal at the edge of a body of water that it cannot cross, aware of the obstacle, unable to proceed. Easter egg number 66 is about a specific marking on the underside of arc units. This marking is only visible if the unit is overturned or elevated, which can happen in specific combat scenarios. The underside of every arc unit has an etching that is not decorative. It is too small and too precisely executed to be decorative. The etching is a number, and the number appears to be a sequential identifier. Players have noted and compared these numbers across multiple units and found that they are not sequential within a single map instance. The numbering jumps with large gaps between observed units. The implication is that the population of arc units in the game represents a tiny fraction of a total number that is much larger. The units the game shows you have numbers in the hundreds of thousands. The ones you encounter are a sample from a registry that contains enormously more entries. Easter egg number 67 is about color change. Arc units do not change color under normal operating conditions, but there is one condition under which a slight color shift has been documented across multiple players in multiple sessions. When an arc unit has been in an area without detecting any player for a very long time, an extended passive state, its surface color shifts very slightly toward the blue end of the spectrum. It is a subtle change, easy to dismiss as a lighting effect, but it has been documented in lighting conditions where the ambient light should not account for it. The blue shift in extended passive state, in biological terms, would be a sign of lowered metabolic activity, lower body temperature, a resting state. The game might be modeling something like a low-power rest state for its machines, And if that is what this color shift represents, then ARC units are not always running at full power. They have something like sleep. Easter egg number 68 is about what happens to ARC units when they're exposed to the audio logs the game provides as lore items. Some players have experimented with playing audio content near ARC units in various states, using speakers and audio emitters available in the game world. When typical audio, combat sounds, ambient noise, weather effects is played near ARC units, it triggers their standard detection and alert behavior. But when an audio log containing human speech is played near an ARC unit in passive state, the unit's behavior changes in a way that does not match its standard response to audio input. Rather than the alert escalation, the unit pauses. It stops its patrol movement, orients toward the audio source, and remains still for a duration that is longer than its standard targeting sequence. It is not detecting a threat, it is listening. The pause duration is consistent with the length of a short spoken sentence, as if the unit is waiting for something to finish before deciding what to do next. Easter egg number 69 involves a specific ARC unit type that is rarer than the standard Scout. This unit, which the community has informally named the Observer based on its behavior, has a surface detail that the smaller units do not. On the rear section of the Observer unit, in a location that would be its upper back if it were anthropomorphic, there is an appendage that is folded against its body and not visible in most movement states. It is only visible in the brief moment before and after the unit deploys its primary function. In that moment, the appendage unfolds slightly before refolding, and the texture on its surface during that unfold moment shows a pattern that is organic in a way nothing else on any ARC unit is. It looks like feathers. Not exactly, not clearly, not in a way you can screenshot and show someone without caveat, but the arrangement of overlapping surface elements on that appendage in that brief moment has the geometry of a feathered structure. The Observer is carrying something folded against its back that looks like a wing. Easter egg number 70 is about the reaction of ARC units to each other's deaths. In standard ARC Raiders gameplay, the death of one ARC unit typically elevates the alert state of nearby units. This is expected behavior, a response to the detection of a threat. But there is a secondary response that occurs after the initial alert escalation, in the period when the threat has moved away or gone quiet, and the other units are returning to a lower alert state. In this return to baseline period, the surviving units in proximity to the fallen unit do something that has no tactical explanation. They move toward the fallen unit's position, not to investigate as they would a threat, but to stop near it briefly before continuing their patrol. They do not interact with the body, they do not examine it, they simply pass close to where it fell, slow fractionally, and continue. It happens once in the first patrol pass after the alert ends, and then the fallen unit is treated as neutral background in all subsequent passes. They pause near their dead once, and then they move on. Easter egg number 71 involves a sound that occurs during combat with a specific ARC unit type. The large, heavily armoured unit that players typically call the tank for its durability makes a series of sounds during high-damage combat states that include, buried in the audio mix, something that has been described by players as a moan. Not a digital distortion moan, not a mechanical resonance that happens to have that frequency, but a structured tonal sound that rises and falls with a pattern that matches distress vocalization in large mammal calls. The sound is there in the audio data. Players have isolated it and slowed it down. It is brief, less than a second, and it is deeply embedded in the layered audio of the unit's combat sounds. Whether the sound designers put it there intentionally as a deliberate design statement about what these machines might be experiencing, or whether it is an artifact of audio layering that nobody noticed before release, it is there, and it is hard to unhear once you've heard it. Easter egg number 72 is about navigation. ARC units navigate terrain in a way that is efficient and reactive to obstacles, which is standard enemy AI behavior. But there is one category of obstacle that ARC units behave differently toward than all others. When an ARC unit encounters a human-constructed threshold, a door frame, a window opening, a deliberately built passageway, it pauses at that threshold for a fraction of a second before passing through. This pause does not occur with natural obstacles, rubble, terrain changes, open ground. It only occurs at constructed thresholds, at openings that are human-made or intended. The pause is very brief, easily missed, but it is consistent across all unit types at all human-built openings. One possible reading is that constructed thresholds are identified and flagged in the unit's environmental analysis, treated as a distinct category of thing worth registering. They know when they're passing through something human-made. They register it, briefly, every time. Easter egg number 73 involves the total number of ARC units visible in the game's environment at any given time. Players who have attempted to census the ARC presence in the map at various times of the in-game day cycle have found that the population is not constant. Unit count varies across the day cycle, with a consistent dip in the late afternoon period of the game's light cycle, roughly corresponding to the 3 to 5 hours before sunset. During this window, fewer ARC units are present in most zones than at any other time of day. They do not leave, exactly, because you can still encounter them if you move through the right areas, but the density drops and they are harder to find. Predators in the natural world do similar things. They have activity patterns tied to light and heat and prey behavior. The ARC units have a quiet period in the late afternoon, and they have had it consistently across every session where this has been tested. Easter egg number 74 is about a structural detail of the largest ARC unit type encountered in the current game build. The players call this unit the Titan. The Titan is a rare encounter, and most players are focused on survival rather than observation when one is present. But a player who has died to a Titan many times and paid close attention to it in its final pre-engagement seconds has documented something about its forward-facing surface. The surface of the Titan's chest plate, the large flat section that faces forward, is not simply armor. Under specific lighting conditions, the surface shows a faint pattern that is revealed by the light bouncing across it. The pattern is text. It is not legible as any known alphabet. The characters, if that is what they are arranged in lines and have a consistent baseline, which suggests they are meant to be read sequentially. The Titan is covered in writing. Whatever it says, it has been there since it was made. Easter egg number 75 is about the arc of an ARC unit's patrol path over a full in-game day. If you could track a single unit's position over 24 hours of in-game time, which requires patience and a good position to observe from, its total path describes a circuit that is not a simple loop. The unit is not walking a set route. Its patrol covers different ground at different times of day in a pattern that, mapped out, looks more like the behavior of a creature marking a territory than a machine following a program. It covers the boundaries of an area during peak activity hours, and during low activity hours, it moves toward the center of that area. This is exactly the territory behavior of a range animal, wide-ranging when active and retreating to a central safe location when resting. The ARC units are not patrolling to cover ground for threat detection. They are ranging across a territory that, in some sense, they consider theirs. Easter egg number 76 is about what ARC units look at when they are not looking at anything. In passive state, with no targets and no alerts, an ARC unit's optical sensors move. This movement is not a scanning pattern in the standard mechanical sense of the term. It is not systematic, not left to right, not a coverage sweep. The optical movement in passive state is closer to what you might call gaze, the way an animal looks around its environment, not to find a specific thing, but simply to be aware of where it is. The gaze stops at certain objects longer than others. Water surfaces hold the gaze longer than walls. Open sky holds it longer than closed interiors. The gaze is drawn to the same kinds of things that draw biological attention, movement, openness, light and its reflection. An arc unit standing quietly, looking at the water, looking at the sky, is doing something that mechanical entities should not need to do at all. Easter egg number 77 is about an arc unit variant that has only been confirmed by a small number of players and is subject to some skepticism in the community, but which I believe is real based on the documentation available. This variant is described as identical to a standard scout unit in all visible ways, but one, it carries something. Not as a weapon, not as a sensor attachment, but held in one of its secondary appendages in a way that is difficult to characterize as tactical. The object is small, roughly the size of a human hand, and its material properties suggest it is organic rather than mechanical. Players who have gotten close enough to observe it describe it as looking like a dried plant, specifically a dried seed head of a grass or grain plant. An arc unit that carries what appears to be a seed head is either carrying it for a reason the game never explains, or it picked it up. And the idea of an arc unit picking something up and carrying it for reasons other than tactical function is, in this world, a genuinely disturbing thought. Easter egg number 78 is about the footprint arc units leave on soft terrain. The pattern of their footprints is consistent with their leg architecture and weight, as you would expect. But the depth of the footprints is variable in a way that cannot be entirely explained by terrain softness variation. Units that have been active for a longer period in a session leave deeper prints than freshly spawned units of the same type in the same terrain. The depth differential is too consistent and too correlated with unit activity time to be noise in the terrain simulation. The units are getting heavier as the session progresses, or, more precisely, they are pressing into the ground with increasing force as their activity level increases. What gets heavier as it operates longer is not a machine with a fixed mass. What gets heavier as it works harder is a muscle, tensing progressively under load. The footprints suggest that the arc units increase their ground reaction force over time in a way that implies physiological rather than mechanical change. Easter egg number 79 involves the behavior of arc units after a player extraction. When a player successfully extracts from a zone, the remaining arc units in the area do not simply continue their patrol as if nothing happened. There is a period, roughly 5 to 10 minutes, of in-game time, during which their behavior changes subtly. They spend more time at the extraction point's location. They cover the area where the player was last visible more frequently. They return to the site of the extraction and do their brief pause there, the same pause they perform near fallen unit positions. They are treating the extraction point as they treat a death site. The player is not dead from their perspective. The player simply disappeared from the world. And the arc units mark that disappearance the same way they mark a death, with a single, brief, deliberate visit to the place where something that was here is no longer here. Easter egg number 80 involves a specific piece of sound design that occurs when you're inside a building that an arc unit is patrolling outside. When an arc unit passes the exterior wall of your position, its audio profile changes in a way that goes beyond simple wall-muffled sound. The frequency profile shifts in a way that is physically accurate to how sound transmits through concrete. But under the correctly processed signal, there is a secondary tone that does not match any of the unit's documented audio signatures. This secondary tone appears only in the wall-transmitted version of the sound and is absent from the direct transmission version. Whatever this tone is, it is either a frequency that is produced by the unit but not normally audible in open air, a frequency that the unit's own body absorbs in open air but which transmits through solid material, or a frequency generated by the interaction between the unit's systems and the building materials. Any of those options is interesting. A sound that only exists when it passes through a wall is the sonic equivalent of something that is only visible in reflection. Easter egg number 81 involves the markings on ARC units' optical system specifically. Each ARC unit type has a distinct optical assembly, and each one is marked differently, with what appear to be manufacturing or calibration marks, fine lines, and reference points etched into the housing around the optical sensors. Players have compared these markings across individual units of the same type and found that while most units of a given type have identical markings, a small percentage have markings that are slightly different. The variation is not random damage. It is systematic, the same modified markings appearing on the same small percentage of each unit type consistently. These modified mark units do not behave differently in any documented way. They look the same and act the same as their standard counterparts. The only thing different about them is those markings, which suggests that the difference is in classification or origin rather than function. Some ARC units were made differently at the source, and the difference is recorded on their eyes. Easter egg number 82 is about the moment just before an ARC unit transitions from patrol to alert state. There is a visual tell in this transition that players learn to read for tactical reasons, but the specific tell has an element to it that goes beyond the tactical. In the fraction of a second before the full alert state initiates, the ARC unit's entire body goes still. Not the stillness of a machine that has stopped moving, but the absolute stillness of an animal that has detected something and is deciding what to do. The quality of that stillness is different from any other movement state. It has a quality of held breath, of suspension, of something that has sensed a change and has not yet decided how to respond. A machine does not hold its breath before deciding. A machine processes input and outputs a response. The brief, still deciding moment before an ARC unit alerts is biological in its texture, and it is more unsettling than anything that comes after it. Easter egg number 83 is about a specific ARC unit encounter that has been documented in one location in the game under circumstances that have been reproduced but not yet fully explained. In the industrial district near the central facility, players have encountered an ARC unit that is deactivated, collapsed against the wall of a building, but not dead in the way that player-killed units are dead. Its visual indicators suggest a functioning but inactive state rather than a system shutdown. The unit does not respond to player presence. It does not respond to noise. It cannot be interacted with, as a normal dead unit can be. It just sits there, against the wall, inert but not off. Players who have watched it for extended periods report that it does not stay there indefinitely. After a period of roughly 15 to 20 minutes of in-game time, it activates, stands up, and walks away in a direction that is not toward the player and not along any standard patrol route. It was resting, and when it was done resting, it left. Easter egg number 84 is about the ARC units and weather. The game has a dynamic weather system, and ARC units are affected by weather. In some gameplay-relevant ways, their audio profile is harder to hear in high wind, for example, but there is a weather condition, heavy fog, under which ARC unit behavior changes in a documented way that is not explained by gameplay mechanics. In heavy fog conditions, ARC unit patrol radii shrink. They cover less ground and move more slowly. Fog reduces the effective range of optical detection systems, which provides a mechanical explanation for the smaller patrol radius, but the slower movement is not explained by fog's effect on sensors. A machine moving slower in fog is not reading as faster in fog. A machine moves at the speed its instructions set. An animal slows in fog because it is uncertain, because visibility reduction creates a felt increase in environmental risk because the reduced information about the surrounding space makes the space feel larger and less knowable. The ARC units slow down in fog because the fog is uncertain, and they know it. Easter egg number 85 is about the ARC unit known as the Harvester, the large quadrupedal unit that players often encounter near resource-rich areas. The Harvester is named by the community for its apparent behaviour around resources. It seems drawn to areas of concentrated material value. But these specific resources it is most frequently found near are not the ones with the highest gameplay value. It is found most often near organic material, near places with surviving plant growth, near water, near what remains of soil that might once have grown things. The inorganic resources, the metal, the electronics, the manufactured goods that have the highest extraction value are not what draws the Harvester. It is drawn to what is alive or was once alive. Whatever it is harvesting, it is not harvesting the same things the players are. Easter egg number 86 is about a detail on the ARC unit known as the Conduit, the flying unit that players encounter in outdoor spaces. The Conduit's flight system is visible when it is in hover mode, the mode in which it maintains a fixed position while scanning below it. In hover mode, the underside of the conduit is fully visible from below, and the underside contains a detail that is not apparent from any other viewing angle. The underside surface is textured differently from the rest of the unit. Where the rest of the unit is smooth and hard, the underside has a texture that in the game's material rendering looks slightly yielding, slightly organic, as if the surface is not metal but something else. Players have described it as looking like skin, specifically like the belly of a large flying animal, softer and more vulnerable than the armoured top and sides. The conduit has a belly. That is not an aerodynamic or structural requirement, that is anatomy. Easter egg number 87 is about the silence between ARC units. When two ARC units are within communication range of each other, players who have closely observed their audio profiles note that the standard ambient sounds each unit produces are sometimes interrupted by a brief silence in both units simultaneously. This synchronized silence lasts for a fraction of a second, and then both units resume their standard audio. The silence is simultaneous in both, which rules out a random coincidence of audio cycle timing. The most straightforward interpretation is that the units are communicating, exchanging something in a signal band that the game does not render as audible sound, and that the brief silence is the transmission moment. They are talking to each other, briefly, inaudibly, in the spaces between their other sounds. They communicate in the silences. Easter egg number 88 involves the specific visual degradation pattern on older ARC units. The game's environment has been in its post-catastrophe state for some time, and some ARC units show more environmental wear than others, more oxidation, more surface pitting from weather exposure, more accumulated material on their surfaces. If you map the distribution of heavily weathered versus lightly weathered units across the map, you find that the most weathered units are concentrated in specific areas. These areas are not necessarily the areas with the most extreme weather exposure in the environment design. They are areas that, based on other environmental details and lore fragments, appear to have been some of the first places the ARC established a presence. The most weathered ARC units are the oldest ones. They have been here the longest, and the heaviest concentration of ancient-looking ARC units is in a part of the map that lore fragments suggest was the first place humans tried to make a stand. Easter egg number 89 is about what ARC units respond to that has no tactical justification. Most player interactions with ARC units are driven by the player's need to avoid detection or to fight. Most ARC unit responses are therefore defensive or aggressive, detection and pursuit. But there is a behaviour that ARC units exhibit in response to something they have no tactical reason to care about, which is fire. When fire is present in the environment, whether from burning debris, ignited fuel sources, or player-set fires, ARC units in proximity will orient toward it. Not in an alert way, not in a targeting way. They face it and hold their facing. They do not approach beyond a certain distance, and they do not attack the fire. They look at it the way living things look at fire, because fire is something that living things evolved to pay attention to. Easter egg number 90 is about a detail in the game's procedural generation system for arc unit patrol paths. The system that assigns patrol paths to arc units uses a set of rules to define those paths, and one of those rules appears to be that no patrol path should cross the same point more than once in a full cycle. This is standard for non-repetitive patrol behaviour, but there is an exception. At one point in every arc unit's patrol cycle, regardless of how the rest of the path is constructed, the path returns to the unit's spawn point. Every arc unit's patrol, no matter how it varies otherwise, includes a return to the place it was born. It comes back once per cycle to where it started. That is not a navigation efficiency rule. That is something else. Easter egg number 91 involves the arc unit's visual response to high-altitude observation by players. Players using elevated positions to observe the game world are a standard strategy in extraction shooters. Arc units respond to detection of players in elevated positions with standard behaviours, alert and approach, but before the full alert initiates, when an arc unit at ground level detects a player at a significantly elevated position, there's a brief period where the unit tilts its optical assembly upward at an angle that is greater than required for direct visual contact with the player's position. It looks past the player. It looks up beyond where the player is at the sky above. Whether this is a visual calibration behaviour, a communication uplink check, or something else entirely, the arc unit's first response to seeing something above it is to look further up, past the immediate thing, toward whatever might be above that. Easter egg number 92 is about a rare, reportedly extremely rare encounter that I am including here, because enough players have documented it consistently that I believe it is real. Some players have reported finding an arc unit standing still, facing a wall in an interior location, in an area where it has no tactical reason to be and no patrol behaviour to execute. The unit stands facing the wall and does nothing. It is not in an alert state, not in patrol mode. It is simply standing facing a wall in what the game models as a fully functioning state. The players who have encountered this describe leaving the unit where it was and returning later to find it still in the same position. When eventually it does move, it does so without any apparent trigger, simply turning and walking away as if it has decided, on its own, that it has been there long enough. Easter egg number 93 involves the sound design of arc unit death specifically. The precise sound of an arc unit shutting down, the death sound, has been analysed by players and contains at the very end of the audio clip a sound that is entirely separate from the mechanical shutdown components. It is a very quiet, very brief tone. Not a mechanical resonance, not a power system downcycle tone. A tone in the frequency range associated with biological voice. It is the last thing you hear from an arc unit, and it is the softest and least mechanical thing in its entire sound library. Whether it is the sound of something being released, or the sound of something ending, or just an audio design quirk that was not noticed, it is at the end of every arc unit's death sound, quiet as an exhalation, gone in less than a second. Easter egg number 94 involves the design of arc unit limbs in relation to the physics of the game world. Arc unit limbs are designed for the terrain they operate on and are architecturally suited to it. But if you analyse the joint range of motion for arc unit limbs, specifically the scout unit, the joints are capable of a greater range of motion than the unit ever uses in any of its current behavioural states. A machine designed for the behaviours it exhibits would not need joints that can articulate beyond the range those behaviours require. The additional range of motion exists. It is in the model, but it is never called upon. Either the ARC units are capable of behaviors that they do not currently express, behaviors that would require that extra articulation range, or they were designed in a different environment, for different behaviors, and arrived here with mobility they no longer use. Easter egg number 95 is about a sound that precedes ARC unit arrival in a zone. Before ARC units spawn in, before the environmental cues that alert players to their approach, there is a very brief audio event that has been documented in frame-by-frame audio analysis. It is approximately 400 milliseconds before the earliest conventional detection cue, and it is a tone that falls outside the standard ARC audio profile. Players who have isolated this tone describe it as closer to a biological sound than a mechanical one, in the range of what might be called a breath or a hum. It suggests that whatever process brings ARC units into presence in the world is not purely mechanical, is not like a machine being switched on, but is preceded by something that sounds like preparation, like the sound of something about to begin. Easter egg number 96 involves the specific terrain features that ARC units choose as their default resting positions within patrol zones. When an ARC unit is in its lowest activity state within a given zone, it will tend to gravitate towards certain terrain features rather than others. The preferred resting positions are not the most defensible or the most strategically advantageous positions. They are the most elevated positions that still offer cover. They are, in other words, positions where you can see a great deal of your surroundings while also being somewhat hidden. This is not a machine's tactical preference. This is the habitat preference of an animal that has learned to balance observation with concealment. The ARC units rest where they can watch and not be seen. That is the behavior of a prey animal, and also the behavior of a predator in an environment with other predators. In their rest, the ARC units reveal something about their place in the world. Easter egg number 97 involves the behavior of a specific ARC unit type, the one players call the Sentinel, in the moments after completing its primary function. The Sentinel is a support unit. Its primary role is detection and relay rather than direct combat. After the Sentinel completes its detection cycle, there is a brief period before it resumes patrol mode. In this window, rather than standing still or beginning patrol immediately, the Sentinel does something unexpected. It performs a small, deliberate, repetitive movement. The movement is consistent across all Sentinel units and is always the same: a slight rotation of its optical assembly, back and forth, 3 times before the movement ceases and patrol resumes. 3 repetitions of the same movement at the completion of a function. Ritualized behavior, performed after task completion, is characteristic of certain biological nervous systems, not of mechanical systems. A machine completes a function and then proceeds to the next instruction. A sentient being completes something and then, briefly, processes that it was completed. Easter egg number 98 is about the specific way ARC units treat the bodies of their own dead. I mentioned earlier that they visit the locations of fallen units once, but there is an additional behavior that I did not cover. If an ARC unit body is moved by the player, dragged or displaced, the behavior of other ARC units when they approach the original death location changes. They spend longer at the spot. They orient differently. They appear, in a sense, confused. The location where the body was is still significant to them. The absence of the body from the significant location is something they register. They respond to the absence rather than accepting it. A machine that moves past the location where a dead machine was would register no special significance. The significance is in the place, the specific place, not in the presence of the object that made the place significant. They are visiting the memory of where it was, not the thing itself. Easter egg number 99 involves the environmental interaction between ARC units and the ARC material that can be found as a resource in the game. The arc material that players collect is derived from arc units and arc structures, and it has its own visual and physical properties in the game world. Arc units in the environment do not ignore this material when they encounter it on the ground. Players who have placed collected arc material as bait or distraction have noticed that arc units passing near it behave differently than they do near other foreign objects. They do not pick it up, they do not alert to it, but they route around it. Their patrol path moves slightly to avoid direct contact with the fallen material. They give it a wide berth in the same way an animal gives a wide berth to the remains of its own kind. The scattered material of other arc units is not neutral terrain to them. It is something they would rather not walk through. Easter egg number 100 is the halfway point of this list, and it is one I find genuinely striking as a closing note for this chapter. The combined total count of all arc units in all zones of the game's current playable map across a full in-game day cycle, counting all spawn states and patrol positions, has been estimated by players who have dedicated the time to documenting it. The number is not definitive and varies by session, but the best available estimate is that the total arc unit count across the full map at any given time sits at approximately 301. 301, the same number as the Easter eggs in this video. Whether that is a number the developers chose deliberately, whether it contains any significance, or whether it is pure coincidence, I leave entirely to you. Easter egg number 101 is the last one in this chapter, and it is the simplest. Arc units do not have names. They are not named in any document, any log, any piece of lore content in the game. They are classified, they are numbered on their undersides, they are described, but they are not named. Nothing in the game suggests they were ever given names by the humans who studied them, and nothing suggests they have names among themselves. The game gives names to every human character, to every faction, to every location. It withholds names only from the entities that dominate the world. And something about that, something about the specific quality of a thing that is everywhere and powerful and completely unnamed, is more unsettling than almost anything else in the game's design. Chapter 3. The Survivor's Easter egg, number 102, involves the faction insignia visible on various pieces of Survivor equipment and clothing throughout the game. Most of the major faction insignia are documented in the game's lore materials, available to players who go looking for them. But there is a smaller, less prominent insignia that appears on equipment belonging to characters who are not affiliated with any of the major factions, lone survivors and independent operators. This insignia is not documented anywhere in the game's official lore. It is a simple design, a circle with a line through it, which conventionally indicates negation or prohibition, but worn as an emblem by people operating alone. A community interpretation holds that this insignia is shared among survivors who have specifically rejected faction affiliation, not because they have not encountered factions, but because they have declined to join any of them. It is the emblem of refusal. The people wearing it chose to be outside the systems that the other people in the game's world chose to build. Easter egg number 103 is found in the specific items that survivor camps contain. Player bases and survivor encampments throughout the game contain various items that reflect the tastes and priorities of the people who lived in them, and the game puts real thought into what those items say about the people who gathered them. But there is a category of item found in survivor camps that has no obvious practical value and no stated lore significance. Several camps contain collections of things that are specifically pre-catastrophe cultural artifacts. A cassette tape with a handwritten label, a printed photograph of a landscape with no people in it, a small decorative object of the type you might keep on a desk, for no reason other than that you like it. These objects have no function, no loot value, no direct lore connection. They are mementos. Someone in these camps, when deciding what to carry during the end of the world, chose to carry things that made the world feel like theirs. Easter egg number 104 involves a specific text document found in one of the survivor encampments in the northwestern sector. This document, a handwritten letter on what appears to be the back of an operational form, is readable if you take the time to approach it and use the game's close inspection mechanic. The letter is addressed to someone the writer calls only K and is written in a register that suggests close familiarity. The letter is not extraordinary in itself. It contains personal sentiments and references to shared experiences. What makes it an Easter egg is what is on the other side, the front of the form it is written on. The form is a pre-catastrophe administrative document for a research facility, and the facility name on the form header is one that appears nowhere else in the game except in one other location, a small detail in the background of a promotional image released before the game launched. The letter was written on paper from a place that the game has referenced once, in marketing material, and nowhere else in the game's actual content. Easter egg number 105 is about the tattoos on survivor characters. Many of the named survivor characters the player encounters have visible tattoos on their skin, and these tattoos are detailed enough in the character modelling that they can be examined. Most of the tattoos are personal and do not seem to carry lore significance, but several survivor characters who appear to have no connection to each other, who operate in different parts of the map and belong to different factions or no faction, share a tattoo. Not the same design exactly, but the same subject matter. Each of them has a tattoo of a compass. The compasses are different in style and placement, but they are all compasses, and they are all oriented so that the north arrow points toward the person's heart. Whatever the shared significance of a compass pointing inward is among these unconnected characters, the game has not explained it. The fact that multiple isolated survivors across a ruined world all chose the same private symbol, pointing in the same direction, points toward a connection the game has not yet made explicit. Easter egg number 106 involves the cooking setup in one of the more established survivor camps. The camp has a functional kitchen area, improvised but clearly used regularly, and the cooking utensils and setup are consistent with someone who knows what they're doing in a kitchen. The spice and herb containers visible on the shelf above the cooking area are labelled in handwriting. Most labels are standard food preservation labels, content, and date. But one container, smaller than the others, has a label that reads, not like a food label, but like a medical notation. The writing is too small to read clearly at normal distance, but under scope zoom resolves into what appears to be a dosage instruction. Not a recipe measurement, a dose. Someone in this camp is cooking with something that they also use medicinally, and they track the quantities carefully, which suggests either that the substance is limited and valuable, or that the correct quantity matters in a way that ordinary seasoning does not. Easter egg number 107 is about the layout of survivor camp fortifications. The camps that have been established for a longer time have developed defensive structures, barriers, reinforced approaches, elevated observation points. The architecture of these defences follows principles that are consistent with conventional fortification theory. They are designed to be defensible from outside threats, but several of the longer established camps have a secondary ring of internal barriers that are oriented differently from the outer defences. The internal barriers face inward. They are not positioned to repel an external threat coming in. They are positioned to contain something within the camp itself. The outer walls keep the world out. The inner walls are keeping something inside from getting to somewhere else. The game never explains what required internal containment in these camps. The internal barriers are there, facing the wrong direction for external defense, and nobody in the game's narrative ever mentions them. Easter egg number 108 is about a sign found in the largest survivor settlement in the playable zone. The settlement has various hand-painted signs directing people to resources, facilities, and rules. Most of these are straightforward governance, rules about resource sharing, directions to medical facilities, schedules for watch rotations. One sign, however, is different in its content and in its position within the settlement. It is located not at an entrance or near a facility, but in the centre of the common area, in the most visible location in the settlement. And what it says is not a directive or a rule. It is a number. Just a large number, painted in careful digits on a board, with no label, no context, no explanation of what the number counts or represents. The number changes. Players who have visited the settlement in different sessions report the number being different each time. Someone in this settlement is keeping count of something, displaying the count publicly, and never explaining what is being counted. Easter egg number 109 involves the memorial structure at the northern edge of the central survivor camp. The structure is clearly a memorial. Its form and the objects arranged around it are consistent with how humans mark grief. The objects around the base are typical memorial objects, personal effects, small tokens, handwritten notes folded and left. But the structure itself is built from ARC unit components, specifically from components that appear to have been removed from ARC units rather than found as scrap. They are too complete and too carefully arranged to have been salvaged randomly. Someone dismantled ARC units and used their parts to build a memorial. Whether this was a statement of triumph or something more complicated, the choice to build a place of grief from the bodies of the enemy is one of the densest pieces of thematic storytelling in the game's environment. Easter egg number 110 is about the children's drawings that appear in certain locations throughout the game world. I mentioned one earlier in this video. There are several others, found in schools, in family apartments, in sheltered corners of buildings that suggest children sheltered there. Most of these drawings depict the subjects you would expect: families, animals, houses, abstract shapes. But a small number of the drawings depict ARC units. The ARC units in children's drawings are always rendered in the same way, not as threats, not as monsters in the conventional sense, but as large, geometrically interesting shapes that seem to fascinate the drawer more than frighten them. One drawing appears to show a child and an ARC unit standing next to each other, with what, in the drawing's crude visual language, appears to be a peaceful intent. The child who drew it did not draw the ARC unit as an enemy. Children's art is unfiltered. That drawing is the unfiltered perception of a child who saw these machines and did not feel afraid in the way the adults around them did. Easter egg number 111 is about the way survivor groups have adapted their language in response to the world they now live in. This is visible in written materials found throughout survivor camps, notes, announcements, planning documents. The vocabulary across different survivor groups has diverged in interesting ways, each group developing shorthand and terminology that reflects what matters most to them. But there is a set of words that appears across all groups, in all factions, in all parts of the map, used in consistent ways despite the groups having no documented communication with each other. These words are not natural language words. They did not exist before the catastrophe. They appear to have been coined independently by multiple isolated groups, and yet they converge in meaning. The game does not explain this convergence, but linguistic convergence, the independent coining of the same concepts in isolated populations, suggests that the things these words describe are the same across all survivor experience. Some things are universal enough that everyone who lives through them names them the same way. Easter egg number 112 involves the orientation of sleeping areas in survivor camps. Bunks, mattresses, improvised sleeping arrangements, these are found throughout the game's survivor spaces. The orientation of these sleeping surfaces is not random. In almost every case, the sleeping surface is positioned so that the head of the sleeping person, the end of the surface where the pillow or headrest would be, faces the nearest wall rather than the nearest entrance. This is not the most tactically efficient orientation for someone who might need to respond to a threat during sleep. The door-facing orientation allows faster response, but wall-facing feels more protected to the sleeping body, in the same way that animals den with their back to a wall. The survivors are not thinking about tactical response when they sleep. They are thinking about feeling safe. After everything they have been through, the best they can do for safety is to put their back against something solid and face away from the open. Easter egg number 113 is about a recurring symbol that appears in survivor-occupied spaces specifically, distinct from the other recurring symbols elsewhere in the world. This symbol is always made with paint or chalk rather than carved, suggesting it is made by human hands, on a timescale that ink and chalk represent, meaning recently and repeatedly. The symbol is simple: 3 horizontal lines of equal length, stacked vertically with equal spacing. It appears near doorways in survivor areas, near the entrances to storage spaces, near the approach routes to settled areas. It does not appear in Ark-dominated spaces. It is a human mark, and its placement suggests it functions as a signifier of safe passage or claimed territory. But what makes it an Easter egg rather than simple environmental texture is that this specific symbol, 3 equal horizontal lines stacked with equal spacing, is the typographic representation of the equal sign in one documented historical system for encoding social contracts. It means the same. What is inside here is the same as what you are. Easter egg number 114 involves a personal journal found in an abandoned observation post in the Eastern Highlands. The journal is an item that can be collected, and its text is available to read if you do so. Most of the journal is an account of observation shifts, noting Ark unit activity, numbers, patterns, route changes. This is the expected content of a survival observation post record. But the final entry in the journal breaks from the operational format entirely. The final entry is dated but makes no reference to Ark activity. It describes a dream, in significant detail, a specific dream about a specific place described in a way that makes it clear the writer recognized the place from before the catastrophe. The dream is peaceful. The entry makes no comment on the meaning of the dream or on the writer's emotional state. It records the dream with the same careful observational tone as the rest of the journal, as if the dream is simply another thing worth noting, another piece of data from the world, this one received while sleeping. Easter egg number 115 is about the food found in survivor camps. The perishable and preserved food items scattered through settled areas reflect a diet that is consistent with what could be sourced from the local environment, plus what could be preserved or manufactured from available materials. This is expected. But the distribution of food types across different camps tells you something about each camp's relationship with the wider world. Camps with a higher proportion of preserved rather than fresh food are camps that have more restricted access to the outside. Camps with a higher proportion of unusual or difficult to source items have more extensive networks or more skilled foragers. One camp in the northern residential area has a food supply that includes items that could not have been sourced from the local environment at all. They require either a supply chain that the camp's other characteristics do not suggest it has, or a single, unusually well-travelled member who brought them from somewhere else. The food in that camp is from somewhere the camp itself is not. Easter egg number 116 is about an audio recording found in the game as a collectible lore item, one of many that are available if you look for them. This particular recording is notable because of what is happening in the background of the audio, rather than what the speaker is saying. The speaker's words are the documented lore content. But the background audio of the recording contains an ambient soundscape that does not match the environment the speaker says they are in. The speaker describes recording from a shelter in the Central District. The background ambient audio, analysed by players who know the game's soundscape well, matches an exterior environment, specifically the agricultural zone in the northeast. The recording was made outside in the open in the agricultural zone. Whatever reason the speaker had for saying they were in a shelter in the central district, they were not. They were far from the shelter, out in the open, in an area with a specific different significance in the game's lore, and they did not want whoever found the recording to know that. Easter egg number 117 involves the dogs. Ark Raiders does not have dogs as living characters in the game world. There are no surviving domestic animals present in the game's environment, consistent with the theme suggested by the absent pigeons. But there is evidence of dogs in the form of their belongings. Several survivor camps have dog bowls. Some have leashes hanging near entrance points. One camp has a carefully maintained sleeping area that is too small for a human and has a surface texture, suggesting it was for a dog, and the sleeping area is notably cleaner and more carefully maintained than the rest of the camp. Someone in this camp kept a dog bed clean after the dog was gone. The absence of dogs in Ark Raiders is handled with the same care as their presence would be. The world contains all the objects that belong to them, and none of the creatures themselves. Easter egg number 118 is about the way survivor groups mark time. Calendars, tallies, and date records appear throughout survivor spaces. Most of these use the pre-catastrophe calendar system because that is the only system these people knew. But several groups have developed their own timekeeping methods, visible in the way they mark dates in their documents. One group uses a system based on Ark activity cycles rather than solar cycles. Their date markings reference events in the pattern of Ark behavior rather than days of the week or months of the year. Another group appears to have abandoned linear date tracking entirely. Their documents refer to events relative to other events rather than to any fixed calendar point. And one group's documents, found in the southwestern settlement, use a system that nobody in the community has been able to decode. Their timestamps are consistent and systematic, but the system they describe does not match any calendar or time tracking method that players have been able to identify. Easter egg number 119 involves a set of radio equipment found in one of the larger survivor settlements. The equipment is functional, or was functional, and the tuning dial is set to a specific frequency. Players with enough electronics knowledge have tried to determine whether this frequency has real-world significance, and the consensus is that it falls in a range associated with certain emergency broadcast protocols, specifically the kind used for civil defense communication in northern European countries. The dial is not set there by accident. Someone tuned this radio to this frequency deliberately and left it there. Whether they were transmitting on it, receiving on it, or waiting for something to come through on it, the tuned frequency connects the game's post-apocalyptic world to a very specific, real-world emergency communications infrastructure, as if whoever owned this radio knew what channel to listen on when things got bad. Easter egg number 120 is about the handwriting styles found across different survivor documents in the game. Players who have collected and compared survivor documents have noted that the handwriting samples fall into a smaller number of distinct styles than the apparent number of separate individuals suggests. Across the full map's worth of survivor documents, the handwriting can be clustered into roughly 15 to 20 distinct styles. But the number of different named survivors and implied unnamed authors in these documents is higher than 20. Either some people write in very similar hands, or some of the documents attributed to different people were written by the same person. The distribution of shared handwriting styles across documents suggests 2 or 3 individuals have authored a disproportionately large amount of the written material in the game's world, while presenting it as if it were written by many different people. Someone in this world has been writing for others, or writing as others, and leaving their handwriting all over the record. Easter egg number 121 is about the specific way survivor spaces handle fire safety. In a world without fire suppression infrastructure, fire is one of the most serious risks a settled survivor group faces. The larger survivor camps show evidence of fire safety awareness in their layout and preparation, but the specifics of how they have prepared reveal something about their experience. Some camps have fire suppression setups that are oriented entirely toward their own structures, consistent with having survived a fire in the camp itself. Others have fire suppression oriented toward external approach routes, consistent with having dealt with fire being used against them from outside. The orientation of a camp's fire safety infrastructure is a record of the specific fire-related events they have already lived through, and reading that record across the map tells you a rough history of fire as a weapon and as an accident in the game's world. Easter egg number 122 is about a small detail in the character customization system. The available cosmetic options for player characters include various clothing items that have in-world origins and histories. Most of these are straightforward: raider gear, practical clothing, improvised protection. But one cosmetic item, a specific jacket that can be unlocked through normal progression, has a detail on its inner lining that is only visible in specific lighting conditions when viewing the character model closely. The inner lining of this jacket has a very small printed design on it, the kind put there by the original manufacturer for brand identification. The design is not recognizable as a real-world brand, but the style of the branding, the font and layout, is consistent with a specific category of workwear manufacturer that was historically associated with Northern European industrial labour. The jacket has a story that its exterior does not tell. It belonged to someone who worked somewhere specific, and the lining still says so. Easter egg number 123 involves the music, or rather, the absence of deliberately composed music, in the game's survivor spaces. Ark Raiders does not have a traditional musical score in the conventional sense. The ambient audio design is the game's primary sonic language, but survivors in the game clearly had music as part of their lives before the catastrophe. Music players, speakers, instruments, these appear in survivor spaces throughout the game. None of them work except in one location. In a small residential space in the Eastern District, there is a record player that still functions. It is connected to a power source, and it still has a record on the turntable. If you interact with it, the record plays. The music that comes from it is not remarkable in itself. It is a quiet, instrumental piece, the kind of thing that plays at low volume while someone works or reads. But hearing music in Ark Raiders, real composed music from before everything ended, playing quietly in a room that still has its furniture arranged as if someone might come home, is one of the most striking moments the game has. Easter egg number 124 is about a structural choice in the design of one of the game's hidden survivor shelters. This shelter is not on any map and is not indicated by any in-game system. It has to be found by exploration alone, specifically by noticing an unusual drainage configuration on an exterior wall and following it to a concealed entrance. The shelter itself is not notable by its contents. It is modest and contains mostly practical supplies. What is notable is its architectural feature that serves no survival purpose. The shelter has a window, not a peephole, not a ventilation gap, a proper window with a cleared view of the sky. In a shelter designed to be hidden and secure, the inclusion of a window is a significant practical risk. It creates a light signature, a visibility risk, a structural weakness. Someone built this shelter with a window anyway, because they needed to see the sky from inside, and that need mattered more to them than the security concerns it created. Easter egg number 125 involves the relationship between survivor settlements and water sources. Every settled survivor space in the game is within a certain distance of a reliable water source, which is expected for obvious reasons. But the distances vary, and some settlements are much farther from water than they would need to be if water access were the primary consideration. These settlements chose their positions for reasons other than water proximity. The secondary factor that explains the position of every settlement that is further than necessary from water is always the same: elevated ground. Settlements that are farther from water are always higher than necessary. The survivors in this game consistently chose high ground over water proximity when they had to choose, which tells you something about what they feared more than thirst. Being seen before you can see what is coming was their primary concern, and they built their whole world around not letting that happen. Easter egg number 126 is about a message system that survivors apparently developed and use widely enough that its signs appear throughout the game. The system uses physical objects placed in specific configurations to communicate simple information: the direction certain objects face, the arrangement of rocks or debris in specific patterns, the positioning of a particular type of container. Players who have observed and catalogued these configurations across the full map have started to decode some of the patterns. The clearest pattern confirmed is a warning system, a specific arrangement that appears consistently within sight of Ark patrol zones and appears to have been placed there by humans, warning other humans to watch their step. This system was functional, deliberately deployed across the map, and still visible in the world. Someone took the time to mark the approaches to danger across an entire ruined city, and those marks are still there. Easter egg number 127 involves a survivor character who is referenced in several different survivor documents from different locations, but never appears directly in the game. The character is referenced by a single initial, which is the character K that appeared in the letter I mentioned earlier. K is referenced as having done various things across multiple survivor accounts from different time periods and different locations. The accounts do not contradict each other. Together, they sketch a rough portrait of someone who is mobile, trusted by multiple groups, skilled in areas ranging from medical practice to mechanical repair, and who at some point, around a specific time in the game's implied timeline, stopped being mentioned. The last reference to K appears in a document that is dated, by context, later than all the others. That last reference is indirect. K is mentioned not as a person doing something, but as a person who needs to be found. After that document, K disappears entirely from the record. Easter egg number 128 is about the personal effects left at the memorial in the central survivor camp that I mentioned earlier. I said the objects are typical memorial objects, but one of them is not. Among the personal effects left at the memorial, there is a component that is clearly from an Ark unit. It has been cleaned, which means someone handled it after taking it from a unit and chose to clean it before leaving it here. A cleaned piece of Ark material left as a memorial object reads differently from a random scrap. It reads as something brought deliberately, prepared for this purpose. Someone left a piece of a machine at a memorial for humans and prepared it as you would prepare an offering, with care. What that means about the relationship between whoever left it and whatever it came from is something the game leaves entirely open. Easter egg number 129 involves a set of instructions found in a survivor medical facility. These instructions cover basic medical procedures relevant to survival in the game's world: treatment of injuries, management of limited pharmaceutical supplies, triage protocols. All of this is expected, but one section of the instructions covers a procedure that is not typical emergency medicine. The procedure is for treating symptoms that do not map to conventional injury or illness. The symptom list in this section is specific and carefully documented: recurring involuntary vocalizations, persistent orientation toward open sky, difficulty recognizing familiar people, elevated temperature without infection, and one symptom that is listed without a parallel in any conventional medical literature. What the instruction sheet calls mirror movement, which it defines as unconsciously mimicking the movements of Ark units in the immediate vicinity. The instructions for this section do not include a treatment protocol. The section ends after the symptom list with a note that says only, "Observe and document." Easter egg number 130 is about a survivor in an encampment who has built an extensive library of collected documentation. The library covers a wall of what appears to have been the living room of a pre-catastrophe apartment, and it is organised with enough care to suggest the person who built it has a systematic mind. The documents include operational records, survivor accounts, hand-copied information from various sources, and several documents that are original analyses, clearly written by the library's owner. One document in the library, pinned near the centre of the wall, and therefore presumably important to the curator, is a list. The list has no header explaining what it is a list of. It contains approximately 40 entries, each of which is a brief description, a few words, followed by a date. The descriptions are all different. The dates span a period of roughly 2 years. Players who have read the full list and tried to cross-reference the descriptions against other in-game lore have not been able to identify most of the entries. Whatever this list is cataloguing, it is not something the game's wider lore has already explained. Easter egg number 131 is about the physical copies of maps found in survivor spaces. Hand-drawn maps are a standard piece of survivor world building in games of this type, and Ark Raiders has several. The maps are accurate in their broad geographic features, but diverge from the actual game map in their details. Specifically, each hand-drawn map shows the same area differently, with different features marked as significant, different areas shaded as dangerous, different routes marked as passable. The divergence between maps is not error. It reflects the different experiences of different map makers travelling the same terrain. 2 different people could walk the same route and come back with maps that don't match, because what each person registered as significant was different. The collection of maps in the survivor world is a collection of perspectives on the same geography, and each one is true to the person who made it. Easter egg number 132 is about the way survivor groups handle conflict internally. The evidence for this is indirect, visible, in the physical state of survivor spaces rather than in any stated lore. Certain survivor spaces show signs of internal altercation, overturned furniture that was not Ark-caused, damaged walls consistent with physical fights, broken equipment that shows signs of deliberate rather than environmental destruction. The distribution of this evidence across survivor spaces follows a pattern that correlates with resource availability. Well-resourced camps show less evidence of internal conflict. Under-resourced camps show more. The game is showing you, without stating it, that scarcity is the primary driver of violence within survivor groups in this world. The Ark are not the only thing killing people. Survival mathematics, applied to a community with not enough of what it needs, is also killing people and doing it from inside. Easter egg number 133 involves the survivor character, who is the most consistently encountered named character in the game's early zones. A character I will not name to avoid spoilers for players who have not met them yet. This character has a vocal habit that players who pay close attention to the dialogue will notice. In almost every conversation with this character, at least once, they use a phrase that is grammatically unusual. The phrase is a conditional construction that is structurally correct but semantically strange, in which they describe hypothetical futures using a past tense formulation. Not if this happens, but if this had happened. The constant slip into past tense hypotheticals when discussing the future is either a character quirk, an idiolect specific to this character's background, or a suggestion that this character has difficulty distinguishing between futures that are possible and futures that have already been determined. Whether that is a character flaw or a form of knowledge is something the game leaves open. Easter egg number 134 is about a survivor who wrote on their own skin. Among the photographs and personal effects in various survivor spaces, there are several photographs of survivors. taken before or early in the catastrophe. In one photograph, found in the northern residential sector, the person pictured has visible writing on their forearm. The writing is small, but in the right lighting resolves into what appears to be a list of words. The words are not names, not a contact list in the conventional sense, but what appear to be place names, a list of somewhere. Someone wrote a list of places on their own arm, either because they needed to remember them and had no other place to write, or because they needed to carry them with them at all times, and did not trust paper or any other medium to survive what they expected to live through. Easter egg number 135 is about the pets. I mentioned the dog bowls earlier, but pets are represented in other ways throughout the survivor spaces. Cages for small animals, aquarium equipment, terrarium supplies. None of these contain living animals. But one survivor space in the Eastern Residential District has a small aquarium that still contains water, still has its filter running on what appears to be a battery system that someone has maintained, and still has gravel and decorations arranged in the tank. The tank is empty of fish, but it is running. Someone is running an empty fish tank, keeping the water clean, maintaining the filter, sustaining the conditions for life in a container that no longer has life in it. Whether they plan to find fish or whether maintaining the tank is its own purpose, the decision to keep an empty aquarium running in the middle of the world. Ending is one of the most human things in the game. Easter egg number 136 is about the layout of one specific survivor settlement that differs from all others in a significant way. Every survivor settlement in the game is organised around a central resource point, a well, a generator, a storage area. The settlement in the far northwest is different. Its central point is not a resource. It is an open space, with no function, no resource, no equipment. The space is clear and maintained, and the settlement is organised around it, as other settlements are organised around their resource centres. Players who have observed the space over time report that it is used for gatherings, that survivors congregate in it at certain times of day in a way that looks social rather than functional. The centre of this settlement is a commons, a place where people come together for no specific purpose except to be together. In a world where every choice is about survival, building a settlement around empty communal space is a statement about what survival means. Easter egg number 137 involves the medical supplies in survivor camps and what those supplies say about the medical histories of the communities. Different types of medical supplies suggest different types of prevalent injury and illness. A camp with a heavy stock of wound care supplies has seen a lot of physical trauma. A camp with a heavy stock of specific pharmaceutical categories suggests specific prevalent conditions. One camp has a medical supply focused heavily on a category that, in a real-world context, would be associated with respiratory illness management. The environmental context of that camp's location, close to a specific industrial area, suggests an environmental air quality issue. The survivors in that location are living with a lung problem caused by their proximity to whatever is still burning or off-gassing in that industrial area, and they have been managing it with what they have available. Their medicine tells the story of where they chose to live and what it is costing them. Easter egg number 138 is about a survivor document that is written entirely in code. Not cipher, not a damaged or illegible text, but a deliberate substitution code that replaces letters with symbols. The code is the same as one used in at least 2 other documents found in entirely different locations on the map, which means it is a shared code known to multiple people in different places. Players have attempted to crack the code using the 3 documents together and made partial progress. The decoded sections suggest the documents are not records or instructions but personal communications, letters passing between people in different locations who needed a private language. A shared code known to isolated survivors in different parts of the map implies a connection between those people that predates their isolation. They knew each other before. They built a shared secret language and then carried it with them when the world pulled them apart. Easter egg number 139 is about the behaviour of survivors encountered in the game world in response to player character approach. Most survivor encounters follow expected patterns, but one category of survivor, NPC, encountered rarely and only in the outer zones of the map, behaves differently from standard encounter scripting. These particular survivors do not respond to the player character's approach with either fear or aggression. They respond with curiosity. They move toward the player, slowly, maintaining eye contact, not reaching for weapons or moving to cover. They are interested in the player character in a way that is not hostile and not typical. What makes this an Easter egg, rather than just an AI variant, is what happens after the encounter ends. The survivor, having observed the player, does not return to a previous behaviour state. They orient in the direction the player travelled and remain in that orientation for a significantly longer time than the event that would logically explain it. They watch where you went long after you're gone. Easter egg number 140 is about the children's names. The game does not include child characters directly, but children are referenced in survivor documents, personal effects, and memorial items. The names referenced in these materials are consistent with names from a specific Northern European cultural background, which is not surprising given the setting. But 3 names appear with unusually high frequency across documents found in different locations, among families and groups with no apparent connection. The same 3 names keep appearing in different camps, in different handwritings, in different contexts. One is a boy's name, one is a girl's name, and one is ambiguous. The high frequency of these specific names across isolated survivor communities could reflect their general cultural prevalence, or it could suggest that these specific children are the same individuals, referenced in different people's documents because they moved between communities, or because they were significant to multiple groups, for a reason the game has not yet disclosed. Easter egg number 141 involves the sleep schedules of survivor communities as documented in their own records. Guard rotation schedules, meal timing records, and activity logs found in various survivor spaces describe the temporal patterns of each community. Most communities have adapted their schedules to the game's arc activity patterns. More activity during the reduced arc periods in late afternoon. More rest and security posture during peak arc periods. But one community has a schedule that does not track arc activity at all. Their schedule is regular in a way that seems independent of any external variable. They sleep and wake on a fixed interval that does not respond to arc rhythms, weather changes, or any documented environmental condition. Players who have tried to determine what the community's schedule is organised around have not found a consensus answer. They are on a clock that nobody else knows the origin of. Easter egg number 142 involves a technical document found in the ruins of what appears to have been a survivor engineering workshop. The document describes a modification to standard radio equipment, written in technical language that suggests the author had pre-catastrophe engineering training. The modification described is designed to receive signals in a frequency range that standard civilian radio equipment cannot access. The document is detailed enough to build from if you had the materials. What makes it an Easter egg is the stated purpose of the modification in the document's own introduction. The author writes that they designed this modification because they needed to hear what the machines are saying to each other. They believed the arc units were communicating on a specific frequency. They identified that frequency through some process they describe as long observation, and they built the receiver to listen to it. The document ends before describing what, if anything, they heard. Easter egg number 143 is about the relationship between survivor camps and the ARC unit's patrol patterns that surround them. Most established camps are positioned to minimize arc patrol overlap, which makes tactical sense. But when you map the patrol routes of arc units around the larger, more established settlements, the pattern suggests something unexpected. The arc patrol routes do not simply avoid the settlements as a consequence of the settlements being positioned in patrol gaps. The routes appear to have been adjusted to avoid the settlements. There is a difference between being positioned in the gap and being given the gap. If arc patrol routes were determined independently of where survivors chose to settle, the routing gaps and settlement positions might occasionally overlap by chance. But the correlation is too consistent. The arc units have accounted for the settlements in their routing. They know where the people are, and they have chosen not to walk through them. Easter egg number 144 is about a room in the game that has no documented purpose and no lore associated with it. The room is in the basement of a building in the central district, and it is accessible if you find the correct approach route, which is not the most obvious one. The room is empty, completely empty. No furniture, no debris, no environmental texture fill, no graffiti or marks of any kind on the walls. The floor is clean, the walls are clean, the ceiling is clean. In a world that is dirty and worn and accumulated, a room that is absolutely empty and absolutely clean is louder than almost anything else in the environment. The cleanliness of this room is the most conspicuous thing about it. Someone cleaned it recently, thoroughly, and left it empty. The room holds everything that happened here by holding nothing at all. Easter egg number 145 involves a survivor document that is primarily a recipe. Not a symbolic recipe or a recipe with hidden meaning, simply a practical set of instructions for preparing a specific food using available ingredients. The recipe is for a traditional dish from what appears to be the same Northern European cultural background as other elements of the game's setting. The document has a personal quality beyond its practical content. It has small corrections and margin notes, the kind of additions someone makes when they are working from memory and checking themselves as they go. Someone sat down in the middle of the end of the world and wrote out a recipe from memory, carefully, with corrections, so that it would be right. The preservation of this recipe, the act of writing it down so it would not be lost, is the kind of thing you do when you believe the things you know are worth saving. Easter egg number 146 is about the flora that survivors have cultivated or maintained in their spaces. Every established survivor settlement has some growing thing. A kitchen garden, a potted plant, a small soil bed with shoots. The variety of what different settlements grow tells you about their priorities and their knowledge. Most grow food plants, which is pragmatic, but several settlements have growing things that are not food, not medicinal, and have no survival application at all. Purely decorative plants, or plants that appear to be maintained for their scent, or plants that someone chose to grow not because they needed to, but because they wanted to. In every settlement that has a decorative non-food plant, the plant is cared for, with the same attentiveness as the food supply. It matters equally to whoever maintains it. The decorative plants in the game are the survivors asserting that beauty is also a necessity, and managing that assertion in direct competition with staying alive. Easter egg number 147 involves a map found in one survivor location that is not a map of the game's playable zone. It is a map of a different place entirely, somewhere the game does not take you. The map is detailed and clearly drawn, from knowledge rather than imagination. The proportions are consistent, and the level of detail suggests familiarity with the place depicted. The place shown has features that suggest a coastal geography, cliffs or elevated terrain near water, with a specific pattern of built structures along the shoreline. Players have tried to match this map to real-world coastline features, with some plausibility but no definitive match. The person who drew this map was either documenting somewhere they had been before the catastrophe, or somewhere they were planning to go after it. The map is not of where they are, It is of where they came from or where they were going. Easter egg number 148 involves the reading material in Survivor spaces. Books and printed materials appear throughout Survivor environments. Most are partially or entirely damaged. But in the more established Survivor settlements, collections of intact or partially intact books appear on improvised shelves. The specific books present in each settlement tell you about the reading interests and concerns of that community. Most communities skew toward practical material, technical manuals, medical references, agricultural guides. But one settlement in the southeastern sector has a collection that is exclusively fiction. No practical reference material at all. Every book in this settlement is a novel or short story collection, all of them clearly chosen and maintained. Spines uncracked on some, heavily creased on others, indicating favourites. This community decided that the most valuable thing to preserve in a crisis was stories. Not instructions, not knowledge. Stories. Easter egg number 149 is about a survivor who appears to have been an artist before the catastrophe. Evidence for this is in a space in the eastern residential district that shows signs of having been a studio, surface residue consistent with pigments, a collection of brushes, a flat surface with the kind of texture that comes from years of use as a working surface. The artist's work is not in the studio. There are no finished pieces, no sketchbooks, nothing that shows what they made. But on the wall above the work surface, there are small test marks, the kind an artist makes when testing a brush or a pigment. The test marks are still there, dozens of small gestures, colour tests, pressure tests, line quality tests. The work itself is gone, but the preparations for making work are still here. The evidences of an artist preparing to make something, and the something they were preparing to make is nowhere to be found. Easter egg number 150 is about a survivor memorial that is not for a person. Among the various memorial arrangements found in survivor spaces, one memorial in the Northern District is clearly and unmistakably for a dog. The size of the memorial objects, the style of the personal effects left, and one item that is legibly a dog collar with a name tag make this unambiguous. The name on the tag is not one of the dog names that would conventionally be used in the culture implied by the setting. It is a human name. Someone named their dog a human name and built them a memorial when they died. The memorial is maintained. The same evidence of regular attention that marks the clean bench in the park. It has been visited recently enough that the items left on it are in good condition, despite the world around them deteriorating. In a world that has lost almost everything, someone lost a dog named like a person and goes back to remember them. Easter egg number 151 closes this chapter with a detail that connects to several others we have covered. In the central survivor settlement, in the common area I described earlier, there is a wall that has been used as a public notice board. Announcements, schedules, requests, information, the standard content of a community board. But near the bottom of this board, in a position that suggests it has been there longer than the surrounding content, there is a short notice. The notice asks, in plain language, whether anyone has seen or heard from a person described by a specific physical description and a single initial. The initial is K. The notice has been there long enough that it was on the board before the community built up the content that now surrounds it. K was being looked for in this settlement, publicly, early in its history, and either K was never found, or the notice was left up after K was found, because taking it down felt wrong. Either way, the notice is still there, asking its question to everyone who passes and to no one who has answered. Chapter 4. What they left behind. Easter egg number 152 involves a weapon that has been in the game since its earliest access period, a bolt-action rifle that many players use as their primary long-range option. The weapon has a standard item description that covers its practical properties. but the weapon model itself has a detail on the stock that is not referenced in the description. The stock has an inscription, very small, that can only be read by getting close to the item display in the inventory screen and looking at the model carefully. The inscription is a name, but it is not the weapon's designation name. It is a personal name, and it is accompanied by 2 dates, separated by a dash. The format of name-date-date is used for one thing in human culture: a birth year and a death year. Someone whose name and years of life are inscribed in the stock of a rifle that is now available as loot in a ruined world. The rifle outlived the person who owned it, and they knew it might because they signed it. Easter egg number 153 is about item descriptions that contain more information than their primary content. The game uses item descriptions to convey practical information about items' gameplay properties and sometimes their lore origins. But several items have descriptions that contain a sentence or phrase that is not about the item at all. One medical item has a description that covers its practical use, and then, in its final sentence, notes that the item was found in large quantities at sites where the first responders did not return from. This sentence does not affect the item's use. It does not change how you interact with it. It is simply there at the end of the description, telling you something about the history of this particular type of supply without any headline or emphasis. The item description, as a horror story, delivered in a final sentence with no special formatting, is a very specific and effective narrative choice. Easter egg number 154 is about the wear patterns on frequently found loot items. Items that appear as loot throughout the game have surface textures that reflect their history. A weapon that has been used shows use marks. A container that has been opened and closed many times shows wear at its fastening points. This level of detail is consistent and expected in a game with high production values. But players who have compared the wear patterns on the same item type across multiple instances have noticed that not all instances of the same item type have the same wear. Some instances show much heavier use than others. A heavily worn instance of an item is one that was used extensively before it was left where you found it. The wear pattern on the item is a record of how much it meant to whoever had it before you, measured in how much they used it. Some items in this world were barely touched before being left behind. Others were used until they had almost nothing left to give. Easter egg number 155 is about a specific melee weapon found in the game that has an unusual attachment on its handle. The attachment is not a standard grip modification or a tactical enhancement. It is a small cord of braided fibre tied around the handle grip in a pattern that is culturally specific. The braiding pattern is one associated with friendship or protective wristbands in certain cultural traditions, the kind made by hand and given as a personal gesture, rather than manufactured as a product. The cord has been incorporated into the weapon's grip, wrapped in a way that integrates it with the handle, which means it was put there on purpose and used this way. Someone carried a braided friendship cord tied around their weapon handle, and what they brought to fight with carried the memory of someone who cared about them. Easter egg number 156 involves the containers used to transport valuable loot in the game. These containers, the cases and boxes that contain high-value items,